Cooking, Ningchen replied casually as he was cleaning up the fish. How do we start a fire? Mingyu nodded and immediately raised a very practical question. Eat it raw, Ningchen threatened. Zhan, I'm not eating anymore. Mingyu was indeed intimidated. She wrinkled her nose and looked a little worried. Goo goo. The little girl's stomach growled. Her worried little face became even more worried. Ningchen tidied up the fish and picked up some firewood from the ground. Then he walked in front of little Mingyue and sat down. He calmly took out a fire starter. As someone who often bombed other people's residences, how could he not have something to ignite the fire on him? Besides, even if he didn't bring this thing, he was already a 7th-ranked expert. Drilling wood to get a fire was still doable. Mingyu pouted. She was unhappy that the bad guy had lied to her. After starting the fire, Ningchen skewered the fish with a branch and slowly roasted it. At this moment, Mingyu's face turned slightly red. She shyly stood up and secretly ran away. After a while, she ran back. Of course, Ningchen wasn't stupid enough to ask about everything. Little girls also knew how to be shy. After returning, little Mingyu had already washed herself clean. Her face was also much cleaner. It was just that her oversized clothes looked a little out of place. The northern Meng royal family's bloodline was different from the people of the Central Plains. They looked a little exotic. The little girl inherited all her mother's good points. She already showed the potential of a beauty at a young age. Ningchen was curious. It was fine now, but when little Mingyu grew up, how was she going to deceive those old officials? Fan Lingyue's health wasn't good. He probably couldn't wait until Mingyu grew up. When that time came, who would be able to hold up the sky for a little girl? Thinking of this, Ningchen was a little irritated. When did he become so sentimental? Wasn't he looking forward to Fan Lingyue's early death and Northern Meng falling into chaos? The fish is done. Be careful, it's hot. Ningchen passed the roasted fish to little Mingyu, suppressing the messy thoughts in his heart. He would talk about the future in the future. Who could be sure that the little girl wouldn't become the second Fan Lingyue? Mingyu had been watching since just now. When she saw the fish in front of her, her eyes immediately curved, and she smiled like a crescent moon. The way the little girl ate was very refined. She took small bites and looked very pleasing to the eye. In comparison, Ningchen was quite unparticular. He finished the fish in 3 bites and didn't even spit out the bones. Out of the 10 fish, little Mingyu ate 2. The remaining 8 were stuffed into Ningchen's stomach. To him, these things were just filling the gaps between his teeth. If he was really full, there would probably be no more fish in this river in the future. After eating her fill, Mingyu's mood was obviously much better. She took the initiative to get up and hurry on with her journey. She didn't feel nervous at all as a hostage. Ningchen was helpless. He had really kidnapped a little ancestor. The two of them set off together and headed south along the grassland. The grassland was very beautiful. Mingyu had never left the palace before and had never heard of such a large grassland. Therefore, she was very curious about everything along the way. Looking at the greenery that gradually covered the ground, she would run a few steps and pick up a small flower. Her smile was very bright. Ningchen didn't care about her. It was fine as long as she was within his sight and didn't run away. What's her name? Mingyu ran to the front, turned around and asked curiously.
She still didn't know his real name.
As for the name by Yutong, even an idiot would know that it was fake. Ningchen. Ningchen answered honestly. Mingyu thought hard and then said, Sister Lingyue mentioned you in the letter. She said that you're not a good person and we have to be careful. Ningchen was speechless. Fan Lingyue really thought highly of him, instilling the idea of being on guard against him in little Mingyu so early. Actually, he and Fan Lingyue weren't good people. He was ruthless, but Fan Lingyue was even more ruthless. The difference between the two of them was just 50 steps and 100 steps. When we meet the herdsman, change your clothes. It's too conspicuous. Ningchen didn't argue with the little girl and instead suggested. She came out in a hurry, so little Mingyu was still wearing the little yellow robe she wore during the imperial court. It was indeed very conspicuous. Mingyu wrinkled her little nose. After a moment, she seemed to have thought of something. Touching her head, she couldn't help but feel a little anxious. Shun, where's my crown? I threw it away. Ning Chen didn't care. What was the use of that thing? It was so heavy and would affect a child's development. How can you throw away my things? Mingyu was furious. She pointed at the bad guy in front of her and said crisply, "You're my hostage now. Why can't I throw it away?" Ning Chen reminded the little girl of her current identity. "You're a bad guy." Mingyu was so angry that her little chest puffed up. "Ha, I never said that I was a good person," Ning Chen said leisurely. Which good person would do something like taking a hostage? Moreover, he was taking the emperor of a dynasty. Mingyu turned her face away and decided to ignore him. She walked in front angrily. Ning Chen didn't mind and slowly followed behind her. Wherever the little girl went, he would follow. He wasn't in a hurry to travel yet. The one who should be in a hurry wasn't him, but the Northern Meng Imperial Court and Fan Lingyue. In the end, little Mingyu was too bored by herself and took the initiative to compromise. She once again made a big concession. "I forgive you." Mingyu stopped and waited for Ning Chen to catch up. Ning Chen smiled. This little girl was quite magnanimous. He thought that she was going to argue with him for a while. "Okay, let's make up." Ning Chen stretched out his hand and smiled. "Okay." Mingyu put her little hand in his big hand and let the bad guy hold it. "Are we going to Grand Xia's?" Mingyu suddenly asked.
Yes.
Ning Chen nodded. He still had to return to Grand Xia in the end. "Are you going to hand me over to the Emperor of Grand Xia?" Mingyu looked a little sad. She wasn't stupid and naturally knew her value.
No.
Ning Chen denied without hesitation. He had risked his life to rescue little Mingyu. Why should he hand her over to the Emperor of Grand Xia? Moreover, the Emperor of Grand Xia seemed to have changed into a different person. Mingyu wouldn't be able to survive in his hands. Mingyu raised her little face and asked in surprise, "Then why did you kidnap me?" Ning Chen didn't know how to answer. He really hadn't seriously considered this question. The main reason he kidnapped little Mingyu was to make Fan Lingyue have misgivings. As for how to deal with little Mingyu, he really didn't have any ideas. "We'll see. If Fan Lingyue can withdraw her troops, I'll return you to her." Ning Chen thought for a while before answering. What if Sister Lingyue refuses? Mingyu was a little worried. "We'll talk about it when the time comes. In any case, I won't hand you over to the Emperor of Grand Xia. You don't have to be afraid." Ning Chen promised. Mingyu smiled happily. She realized that the bad guy wasn't that bad. "If you send me back, I'll make you a high official," Mingyu promised very seriously. "How high?" Ning Chen asked. Mingyu thought for a while before replying, "I'll make you a great general." Ning Chen thought for a while. Indeed, it wasn't low. The position of a great general in Grand Xia should be second only to the 10 marquises and on the same level as the city lords. "What if Fan Lingyue wants to kill me?" Ning Chen asked again. "I'll protect you. Sister Lingyue dotes on me a lot. I'll put in a good word for you." Mingyu patted her little chest and said. Ning Chen also smiled. This little girl still had a conscience. She didn't provide for him in vain. In the future, if he really couldn't survive in Grand Xia, little Mingyu would still take him in. "Okay, after the war between Grand Xia and Northern Meng is over, I'll send you back," Ning Chen replied softly. Mingyu nodded vigorously. Her little hand grasped his big hand tightly, unwilling to let go. She knew that this would be the only person she could rely on after entering Grand Xia. On the grassland, the big hand held the small hand, and Yi walked alone at a steady pace. It looked so peaceful and beautiful. Chapter 93. The little emperor of Northern Meng had been kidnapped. 2 days later, this news spread throughout the world like an earthquake. The entire world was in an uproar. This was even more shocking than Xia's gate pass being breached. After hearing this news, everyone had different reactions. Some rejoiced, and some were disappointed. The war between Northern Meng and Xia had reached its most critical point. Such a thing happening now would undoubtedly have a huge impact on the war. Xia was already in imminent danger. Anyone with a discerning eye could see Xia's current predicament. Up until now, Wuxia's strongest force, the 10 Marquises, had betrayed them. Marquis Bloodclad and Marquis Taiping were heavily injured. Marquis Jiu, Marquis Xiang, and Marquis Bai were blocked outside Heaven's Gate. On the other side, the Eternal Night cult came aggressively. Their martial lords and 3 peak 9th-rank generals were too powerful. Only Marquis Triumphant Return could resist them. In the southwest there was the Du Yi Temple. Marquis Wangchuan could not return either. As for the southeast, Mengyang country was ambitious and could invade again at any time. The 2 dynasties had been fighting on and off for decades and had never been at peace. Wuxia had always been wary of this country that was even more shameless than Jinji country. No matter what, Marquis Zhongyong would never return. Due to various reasons, Wuxia, which originally had many soldiers and generals, fell into a situation where there were no generals available. Wuxia, which had been invincible for 1,000 years, was defeated again and again by a woman's schemes. It was a huge irony. Now, this awkward situation was likely to change because of the kidnapping of the little emperor. Wuxia needed a variable that could change the current unfavorable situation. In front of the Northern Meng army, Fan Lingyue, who is still marching, received this news. Her expression immediately became gloomy, and she immediately gave the order to set up camp. It was him. He was actually still alive. That ink sword was given by her. How could she not recognize it? She didn't expect that not only did he not die, but he also gave her such a big surprise. Military advisor Qing Huio knelt on the ground with a pleading expression. Qing family has made a mistake. Naturally, they have to pay the price. I know what I'm doing. Also, tell Qing Wuhan to do her job well. Don't let the cat out of the bag, Fan Lingyue said coldly. Yes. Qing Huio sighed in her heart and accepted the order. In the barbarian dynasty, the barbarian king stood in the hall with a displeased expression. Not only was that kid not dead, but he had also caused such a huge commotion. Wild was holding a letter in her hand. As she read it, a happy smile appeared on her beautiful face. A man's way of thinking was always different from the average person. The things she paid attention to were also different. She only saw that he was at the 7th rank and that his legs had recovered. He's at the 7th rank. A man raised his head and gazed at his father. The barbarian king didn't react for a moment. After being stunned for a moment, he remembered the agreement between them. For a moment, he was even more upset. According to this kid's cultivation progress, peak rank 9 should not be too slow. Did that not mean that his precious daughter would soon leave him? How unpleasant. In the Weiyang Palace of the Great Xia, Zhang Sun and Qing Ning were stunned when they heard the news. They looked at each other and were so shocked that they couldn't speak. Without a doubt, this matter was definitely done by Ning Chen. There were many people in the world with crippled legs, but there were very few people who could fight so well while sitting in a wheelchair. Needless to say, no one but Ning Chen would do such a sinister and daring thing as standing up from the wheelchair to kidnap the little emperor of the Northern Meng. Why did he go there? Zhang Sun couldn't understand. After King Yen took Ning Chen away for treatment, there had been no news of him. Who would have thought that once there was news, it would be such a shocking matter? Qing Ning couldn't answer either. No one in the world could understand that kid's way of thinking. It wouldn't be strange even if he blew up the Northern Meng Palace. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Emperor Xia read the intelligence sent by his spy. A smile gradually appeared on his gloomy face. After a moment, he actually laughed maniacally. The heavens were on Great Xia's side. The heavens were on Great Xia's side. Ning Chen and little Mingyu didn't know what the outside world was like. They were still walking hand in hand on the grasslands. The grasslands were bigger than the desert. The two of them walked until they were disgusted and still hadn't walked out. Mingyu was a little tired. She asked, "How long do we have to walk?" "Tired?" Ning Chen asked. "Yes," Mingyu said in annoyance. "Should I carry you?" Ning Chen suggested. "Okay." Mingyu nodded without hesitation. Thus, Ning Chen carried little Mingyu on his back again. The little girl was very light. She didn't weigh much on his back. She probably wasn't even as heavy as his ink sword. Bad guy. Mingyu shouted. Yes, Ningchen replied. He didn't agree with this nickname that the little girl gave him.
How is he a bad guy?
When we get to the Great Xia, you have to protect me, Mingyu said worriedly. Okay, Ningchen nodded. I'm serious, Mingyu said. I'm serious too, Ningchen replied. Mingyu hugged his neck tightly and said softly, Bad guy, you have to do what you say. If I'm taken away by others, I won't live anymore. She knew very well what would happen if she fell into the hands of others. When that time came, wanting to die would be an extravagant hope. She might as well end her own life. As long as I live. Ning Chun didn't say the rest. He was the one who rescued little Mingyu. Naturally, he would protect her. As long as he lived, no one could take her away. Mingyu understood the meaning behind Ning Chen's words. She put her little face on his back and quietly closed her eyes. She was a little tired and wanted to sleep for a while. Ning Chun temporarily slowed down his pace. After little Mingyu fell asleep, he quickened his pace again. At this moment, the sound of horse hooves and the creaking of wheels could be heard from afar. It came from the south and was gradually approaching. Ning Chun quickened his pace and quickly walked forward. If he guessed correctly, it should be a caravan heading north. As it turned out, this was indeed a caravan heading towards the northern Ming kingdom. When the manager of the caravan saw Ning Chun, he was a little surprised. In this boundless grassland, it was very easy to get lost and starve to death if one were to walk alone. Mingyu, wake up, Ning Chun called out softly. The little girl who had just fallen asleep was obviously very grumpy when she woke up. She pushed Ning Chen's face away unhappily and immediately buried her head back to sleep. Ning Chen had no choice but to give up. He smiled apologetically at the manager of the caravan and then requested to buy some food and clothes. When the manager of the caravan saw the big clothes draped over the little girl's body, he more or less understood what was going on. He took out a set of clothes that he had bought for his daughter and very kindly gave it to little Mingyu. Ning Chen was a little touched. However, at the same time, he couldn't help but lament that there were such kind people in every dynasty in the world. Why did they always have to fight? After the caravan had left, Ning Chen sighed softly and was about to continue his journey when he heard the rumbling sound of horse hooves coming from the southwest. It was very hurried and sounded like there were more than 20 horses. In the next moment, a cloud of dust rose as the horses passed by from afar, rushing north. Ning Chun didn't care at first, but after taking 2 steps, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. These people seemed to be heading towards the caravan just now. Thinking of this, Ning Chen immediately turned around and moved his feet, turning into a shadow and rushing forward. He hoped that his guess was wrong. Kill them. Take the women and the goods. Don't leave anything else behind. Just as Ning Chen arrived 100 steps away from the caravan, he heard a cold voice. The caravan was in chaos. No one had thought that they would run into horse bandits here. What merchants feared the most was horse bandits who killed and robbed. These people were inhumane and only knew how to burn, kill, and rob. However, just as the horse bandits were about to attack, a black light flashed and blood spurted out. Unfortunately, although the horse bandits were inhumane, they had run into Ning Chen, who was even more inhumane. Compared to killing, he was better at it. The black sword was as fast as the wind, mercilessly reaping the life of each horse bandit. Everyone only saw a blur before their eyes as a shadow flashed past. 27 horse bandits were all killed. I'll give the horses to you, said Ning Chen, then turned and left. Only then did the people in the caravan come back to their senses. They were all shocked. No one had thought that the young man just now was actually such a terrifying expert. Kindness is rewarded. This was the thought that flashed through everyone's minds. If the consul hadn't kindly given the young man clothes and food, they probably wouldn't have been able to escape this disaster. Bad guy, you're really handsome, praised little Mingyu, who had woken up at some point. I've always been handsome. Ning Chen accepted the little girl's praise without hesitation. You are the most handsome just now, praised Mingyu. Heh, you really know how to talk, laughed Ning Chen. Can you walk on your own?
Okay.
Little Mingyu nodded and jumped down.
Clothes.
Ning Chen handed over the clothes the steward had given him. When Mingyu saw that it was a little girl's clothes, she hesitated. She had only worn men's clothes since she was young, and had never worn women's clothes. "Change into them," said Ning Chen softly. Mingyu made up her mind and took the clothes. She whispered, "Turn around." Ning Chen was speechless and obediently turned around. This little girl really knew how to be shy. Mingyu wrinkled her nose and made a funny face. She then took off her little dragon robe with a slightly red face and began to change her clothes. "Don't turn around," shouted Mingyu worriedly. "I won't turn around," Ning Chen helplessly replied. She wasn't a big girl, so what was there to be afraid of? After a while, little Mingyu finished changing her clothes. Her face was red as she whispered, "Okay, you can turn around now." Ning Chen turned around. When he saw her, his eyes couldn't help but light up. What a delicate little girl. Although little Mingyu also looked good in the dragon robe, because of the way she was dressed, she was more neutral. Now, little Mingyu's crown had been thrown away, and she had changed into a girl's clothes. It was obvious that she was beginning to show the gentle beauty that a little girl should have. All in all, little Mingyu could still score above 90 points. "Do I look good?" asked Mingyu a little embarrassedly. "Yes," said Ning Chen honestly. "You really know how to talk." Little Mingyu's eyes curved into crescent moons. Chapter 94. A day later, Ning Chen and little Mingyu finally left the grassland and arrived at a city in northern Meng. The two found an inn in the city, paid the tavern, and went straight to the second floor. Ning Chen sat in the room in a daze. He needed to think carefully about what to do after returning to Great Xia. Now that he had little Mingyu with him, he would definitely be hunted down by countless forces, especially Emperor Xia, who would definitely be even crazier this time. Little Mingyu didn't care so much. She lay on the bed and slept. After walking for so many days, she was already exhausted. Ning Chen was a little worried. He knew that he couldn't hide his identity for long. Besides Northern Meng, there were at least 4 people who had already guessed that he was the one who kidnapped the little emperor. Zhang Sun, Barbarian King, Fan Lingyue, and Emperor Xia. In this world, there would always be enemies among those who understood you the most. Fan Lingyue and Emperor Xia were the best examples. Fan Lingyue was still fine, but little Mingyu was in his hands and would definitely have some scruples. Now his greatest enemy was Emperor Xia. Once this lunatic went crazy, he would do anything. He didn't doubt that Emperor Xia had already set up an inescapable net for him to jump into. Last time, it was the Dark Shadow Squad. This time, it would probably be the Dark Dragon Squad. The lowest cultivation of the Dark Dragon Squad in Great Xia was at least the 8th grade. As for the captain, the lowest was the 9th grade or even the peak of the 9th grade. Last time, Prince Xian blocked a 9th grade Dark Dragon Squad for him. This time, he might not be so lucky. Now, he could barely deal with one 9th grade expert. If there were more, he would have to risk his life. He didn't want to risk his life, so he had to think of a way to avoid the pursuit of the Dark Dragon Squad. At this moment, he and little Mingyu were in northern Meng, and no one could recognize him. However, it was hard to say in Great Xia. Back then, when he fought the emissary of the true extreme state in the palace, many people had seen him. Many of the Shadow Dragon Guards who were hiding in the dark probably remembered his appearance. Great Xia and northern Meng bordered each other. After Beizhong Plains, it was Great Xia's Yangue City and Xingqiao Pass. Yangue City was now occupied by the northern Meng army, so it was impossible to go there. As for Xingqiao Pass, there would be countless people waiting for him to die. This was the most dangerous choice, but also the only choice. The only thing he was glad about now was that little Mingyu was a girl, which made things a lot easier for him. Everyone in the world knew that the little emperor of northern Meng had been kidnapped. Therefore, Qing dynasty would definitely check all the strangers who brought along a 7 or 8-year-old boy. As for the middle-aged man who brought along a little girl, no one would have the time to care about him. Thinking of this, Ning Chen got up and prepared to go out by himself. He was not worried that little Mingyu would run away. This little girl was very smart and knew that there were more people in the world who wanted to capture her than save her. In this world, there were only 3 places where little Mingyu would be the safest: Beimeng Imperial Palace, Fan Lingyu's side, and his side. Beimeng City wasn't as prosperous as Great Xia. Ningchen spent a long time searching before he finally found what he wanted. After returning to his room, he fiddled with the mirror. However, disguising himself was not an easy task. Ningchen spent nearly 4 hours trying, but he still did not achieve the desired effect. "You're so stupid." Little Mingyu had woken up at some point and was sitting on the bed, curling her lips. She finally knew why the bad guy had disguised himself to be so ugly. It was not intentional. He was only at this level. Ningchen was slightly ashamed. It was indeed embarrassing to be looked down upon by a little girl. Looking at his 2 hands, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. As expected, they looked like feet. "I'll help you." Mingyu put on her shoes and jumped off the bed. She walked to the front, took over the skin wax, rubber, blades, and other tools, and carefully cleaned up Ningchen's face. "What do you want me to look like?" "Just look a little older." As he spoke, Ningchen sat there, not daring to move. He was afraid that little Mingyu would accidentally disfigure him with a blade. Mingyu understood tacitly. Her little face was extremely focused as she used the tools in her hands to dress him up bit by bit. After the little girl had washed up, there was a faint milky fragrance on her body. It was very comfortable to smell and made people feel at ease. This proved that when it came to makeup, women would always be better than men. After an hour, little Mingyu clapped her hands and took half a step back. She said with satisfaction, "Take a look yourself." Ningchen turned around and looked at the mirror on the table. He sighed in his heart. Comparing goods, throwing away. Comparing hands, chopping. How could little Mingyu be so clever with her hands? The middle-aged man in the mirror had sharp eyebrows and bright eyes. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes, but it did not affect the overall appearance. Instead, it gave people a mature feeling. In short, there was only one word to describe him: handsome. Amazing. Ningchen gave a thumbs up and praised. Of course. Little Mingyu didn't know what modesty was and naturally accepted the praise. After waiting for a while, the rubber on his face was almost dry. Ningchen carefully tore off the mask and put it away. Then, he looked at the gradually darkening sky outside and asked, "Are you hungry? Do you want to eat in or go out?"
Let's go out and eat.
Mingyu thought for a while and stretched out her little hand. Ningchen naturally took the little girl's hand and walked downstairs to the main hall. At this time, it was dinner time. The tables downstairs were basically all full. There was only one empty table left. The 2 went up and sat down, then called the waiter to order. Ningchen was not picky about food, but little Mingyu was very picky. It was no wonder. She had been an emperor since she was young and was tired of eating all kinds of delicacies. It was hard not to be picky. After the dishes were served, Mingyu didn't want to eat anymore after a few bites. She put down her chopsticks and said, "It doesn't taste good." Ningchen's head hurt. If it didn't taste good, what could he do? "Roast the fish for me to eat," Mingyu continued to say pitifully. Ningchen nodded helplessly and said, "Okay, wait here. Don't run around." After saying that, Ningchen got up and walked towards the kitchen of the inn. There should be fish in the kitchen. He would buy it himself and roast it for little Mingyu. The kitchen was not far from the main hall. After Ningchen went in, he stated his purpose for coming. The head chef readily agreed. This was not something excessive. It was difficult to please everyone. No matter how good a chef was, he could not guarantee that everyone would like to eat the dishes he made. Ningchen gratefully paid the money and grabbed a fish. After carefully cleaning it, he borrowed a stove and carefully roasted it. "Is that little girl your younger sister?" the chef asked as he cooked the dishes.
Yes.
Ningchen replied, "You're a good person," the head chef said seriously.
Ha.
Ningchen chuckled and didn't say anything. If he was a good person, then there would be no bad people in the world. He was never a good person. He was just being himself. "I also have a little sister. She's 3 years younger than me. When she was young, she was very naughty. Once, I couldn't help but hit her. Mother taught me that the reason why an older brother should be born before his younger sister is because he needs to grow up faster so that he can protect his younger sister. From then on, I never fought with my younger sister again. Unfortunately, the head chef's face darkened. He sighed and didn't say anything else. My condolences. Ning Chen's expression was calm as he slowly said, I'm fine. It's been many years. The head chef wiped his wet eyes and forced a smile. Treat her well. She's not a burden, but an honor in this life. The head chef's voice was slightly hoarse. I definitely will. Ning Chen nodded. The fish was quickly cooked. Ning Chen thanked the head chef and then took the fish to the front hall. Little Mingyu was probably impatient from waiting. However, just as Ning Chen was about to enter the hall, he suddenly heard the sound of bowls and plates shattering. Feeling that something was wrong, he quickly walked over. When he arrived at the front of the hall and saw the scene inside, his expression immediately darkened. At the table before them were 3 finely dressed youths and a scantily clad woman. Little Mingyu stubbornly stood to the side, unwilling to leave. Her beautiful eyes were filled with tears. Ning Chen's anger immediately overflowed. He calmly walked forward. Just as he was about to speak, his eyes narrowed. Only then did he notice that there were 5 red fingerprints on Mingyu's face. Unable to suppress the anger in his heart, Ning Chen coldly swept his gaze over the surrounding people who were still eating and watching the show. He icily said, Everyone, please leave. I'm going to kill someone. The hall was in an uproar. Some people ridiculed him, while others felt that the atmosphere wasn't going to subside and quickly left. However, the majority of people stayed. Ning Chen no longer paid attention to them. He had already warned them.
Bang.
In the next moment, a white figure flashed. Ning Chen went forward and sent the table flying with a palm strike. At the same time, he directly stepped on one of the youth's face. He revealed his killing intent. Speak, who did it just now?
Impudent.
Do you know who I am? The youth struggled on the ground with a pained expression. I don't care who you are. Even if the heavens came today, they wouldn't be able to save you. As soon as he finished speaking, Ning Chen kicked the young man and sent him flying. With a loud bang, blood spurted out of the young man's mouth and splattered 10 meters away. It's your turn. Speak, who did it? Ning Chen coldly said as he grabbed the other blue-clothed youth. The blue-clothed youth's face was filled with fear. He trembled. You, however, before he could finish his sentence, Ning Chen sent another kick flying. The hall was dyed red once more. It's her. The last youth saw Ning Chen look over and immediately pointed at the woman beside him. The woman was shocked. Just as she was about to deny it, Ning Chen grabbed her throat. Speak, who did it? The dangerous light in Ning Chen's eyes grew stronger and stronger. The woman continued to struggle, but she wasn't willing to speak. Ning Chen coldly laughed and slowly tightened his grip. He liked stubborn people the most. The woman only felt that it was getting more and more difficult to breathe. Under the desire to live, she unconsciously raised her left hand and said with difficulty, This hand. Crack. As soon as she said that, everyone in the hall heard a crack. In the next moment, what they saw was a broken arm. The white bone pierced through the flesh and blood, looking extremely frightening. Several people in the hall couldn't help but vomit. Their faces were pale from fright. Chapter 95. In front of Ning Chen, the woman's expression was twisted. She struggled violently, but she couldn't say a word because her throat was being choked. Blood gushed out from the severed arm. It was a shocking sight. At this moment, a Buddhist sigh sounded. Benefactor, where it is possible to let people off, one should spare them. Please stop. This sudden voice attracted everyone's attention. Looking over, they saw a plain-clothed monk appear in front of the door. He looked young and benevolent as he slowly walked over. On what basis? Ning Chen turned his head and asked indifferently. The heavens are benevolent. I hope young master can be merciful. The plain-clothed monk stopped and bowed. The heavens are benevolent. That's their business. What does it have to do with me? Ning Chen grabbed the woman's other arm and snapped it. Blood flowed out once more. She slapped Mingyu. so I broke both her arms. It's fair and just. What can the heavens say? Ning Chen's cold eyes and emotionless words provoked everyone present. Ning Chen's face was cold and terrifying, causing people to involuntarily shiver.
Amitabha.
Benefactor, your killing intent is too strong. You've already become a demon. I can't allow you to continue wreaking havoc in the world. The plain-clothed monk's body moved, and he stretched out his hand to make a move. Immediately, a strong wind blew towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was stunned.
Clang.
The black sword came out of its sheath and blocked the Buddhist palm. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed, and he slowly said, "Unbreakable Vajra body." The plain-clothed monk's Buddhist palm wasn't injured at all. It was as hard as steel. You're a disciple of Du Yi Temple. Ning Chen's expression sank. His luck was really good. He had met another peak Xiantian successor. Why would someone from that broken temple appear here? I, Wu Ju, will eliminate this demon for the world today. Wu Ju's palm moved, and the sound of Sanskrit rang out. The golden Buddhist light around him was as brilliant as a saint, illuminating everything within 100 jong. Buddhist sacred art, Tathagata illuminates the heavens.
Idiot.
Ning Chen snorted coldly. His black sword condensed into frost and stabbed toward the former's eyes. Wu Ju frowned and raised his palm to block the black sword, but his Buddhist technique was interrupted. Ning Chen's sword turned around and attacked Wu Ju's eyes, forcing the latter to retreat again and again. Treacherous, evil, and arrogant. How can Wu Ju tolerate you? As soon as he finished speaking, the Buddha closed his eyes. Golden light shone brightly, and the sound of Sanskrit filled the sky. A solemn, holy Buddha statue appeared behind him. It was the move of the Buddha in the past. Ning Chen focused. His sword drew the frost and snowflakes in the air. His whole body was raised to its peak.
Boom.
The two moves collided and golden light illuminated the world. However, the ink-colored brilliance broke through the golden light and directly pierced towards Wu Ju's right eye. With his eyes closed, Ning Chen could not move an inch forward. He flipped his right palm and let go of the sword in his hand. Then, he pushed his palm towards the end of the ink sword. With a bang, the Buddha retreated. A drop of dark red blood quietly dripped down from his eyelids. The golden body had already been broken, and the silver sword qi instantly entered. Wu Ju's body trembled, and his mouth was dyed red. Righteous Buddha, where is your Buddha now? Ning Chen sent the former flying with his sword and asked coldly. Jia Wu retreated more than 10 steps and vomited a mouthful of blood. After an instant, he became dispirited. The devil showed mercy, but the Buddha found it difficult to do so. This was the greatest insult to the Buddha. Where had the Buddha of this world cultivated to? Clang. The ink sword returned to its sheath. Ning Chen glanced at the people around him and left a silver ingot to the shopkeeper. Then, he pulled little Mingyu upstairs. With a bang, the door closed. Ning Chen staggered and blood spilled from his mouth. What happened to you? Mingyu was shocked. She hurriedly supported him and asked anxiously. I'm fine. Ning Chen forced a smile. What a powerful Buddhist move. What a powerful indestructible body. If not for this little monk's lack of battle experience, it would have been hard to predict who would have won today. As expected, the monks of the Du Yi Temple were not easy to deal with. It was no wonder that a martial Marquis of the Xia Kingdom was guarding there. Ning Chen closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing for a moment, forcibly suppressing his injuries. After a long time, he slowly opened his eyes. In front of him, little Mingyu's eyes were still filled with worry. The handprint on her face was also becoming more and more obvious. Ning Chen's heart flashed with self-blame. He had said that he would protect her, but he had let her suffer so much. Does it still hurt? Ning Chen carefully caressed the little girl's delicate face and gently asked. It doesn't hurt anymore. Mingyu shook her head and replied. I've let you suffer, Ning Chen said apologetically. It's fine. Mingyu bit her lips and held back her tears. Ning Chen gently pulled the little girl into his embrace and firmly promised, there won't be a next time.
Okay.
Mingyu finally couldn't hold back her tears. The empress of a dynasty was being humiliated here. The little girl had endured it for a long time. Ning Chun lightly sighed. He felt very uncomfortable. I almost forgot. Your fish. Ning Chun took out the grilled fish from his bosom. Fortunately, it hadn't turned cold yet. Mingyu got up from his embrace and smiled through her tears. She took the already flattened grilled fish and ate it like it was a treasure. Ning Chun pulled the little girl to the bed and had her sit on it. He sat down and immediately activated the life scroll. A silver light flowed from his left hand and entered the handprint on little Mingyu's face. Mingyu only felt a cool sensation on her face. The burning pain from before quickly lessened by a lot. Ningchen took out an amulet from his bosom and put it around the little girl's neck. This was something he had when he woke up. It was tied together with the moon-shaped jade pendant. Zhang Sun must have put it on him when he was unconscious. Now that he had no use for it, he gave it to little Mingyu as a small gift. Tomorrow, we'll be going to Grand Xia. It might be dangerous, but I'll protect you, Ning Chen said softly. Okay. Mingyu didn't refute. She knew that Ning Chen wouldn't change his mind. Although he was very good to her and was even obedient to her, when it came to matters of principle, he definitely wouldn't compromise. Quickly go to sleep. We still have to hurry tomorrow morning, Ning Chen said as he rubbed the little girl's hair. Okay. Mingyu obediently lay down and closed her eyes. Ning Chen walked to the side and extinguished the candle. Soon after, he walked over to a table not far from the bed and sat down. After today's battle, he discovered that he was still barely able to fight against these Xiantian successors. The number of moves he had learned was too few. He only had one move that Jian Consecrata had taught him. There was one move in the life scroll. Unfortunately, he hadn't learned it. And even if he did, he wouldn't be able to use it. The price was too great. He couldn't bear it. As for the other heavenly scroll, the dust scroll, the requirements for the moves recorded in it were too high. Unless one was a Xiantian, they couldn't be of any help to him. For now, if he wanted to increase his strength as quickly as possible, the best way was to obtain as many moves as possible. This wasn't an easy task. The majority of the world's cultivation methods were controlled by various powers. If he wanted to obtain them, he would have to pay a hefty price. In this world, the only person he had never seen other people's moves was Prince Yen. With Senior's talent, he didn't need to learn other people's moves. All of his moves were created by himself. Thinking of this, Ningchen suddenly remembered the two shocking sword auras he saw in the desert that day. One of them must have belonged to Senior. Thinking about it carefully, he could roughly deduce the other one. In this world, only the sword in Sword City was comparable to a Xiantian expert. Senior went to the desert to find a sand sword. It was very likely that the sword in Sword City was also there for the same purpose. It was just that he didn't know how Senior was doing now. He said that he would look for him after he found the sand sword. But until now, Senior still hadn't appeared. He didn't doubt Senior's strength. However, the sword in Sword City was comparable to the 5 strongest Xiantian experts in the world. He couldn't help but be worried. After returning to the Great Xia, he would try his best to find out more about Senior. If he really couldn't, he would have to ask Zhang Sun for help. The night passed quickly. The next morning, little Mingyu woke up and the two of them set off. Mingyu didn't want to go to the Great Xia so quickly. Most of the time, she wanted to walk by herself. Ning Chen also let her be. Only when the little girl was tired, he would carry her on his back and speed up. The speed of a 7th grade martial artist when rushing at full speed was very frightening. Moreover, Ning Chen had cultivated the life scroll and his foundation was unparalleled in the world. His Jun Qi recovery speed was much faster than ordinary 7th grade martial artists. He basically didn't need to rest along the way. After 2 days and 1 night, even if little Mingyu didn't cooperate, the two of them still arrived at the border between the 2 dynasties, Beizhong Plains. This was the place where the war between the 2 dynasties took place. Broken spears and flags could be seen everywhere. Too many corpses of Great Xia soldiers were buried in the hundreds of miles of Beizhong Plains. The lonely night was cold, and the cold moon shone alone. The night in Beijing Plains was frighteningly cold. The cold wind whistled, and the qi was bone-chilling. Ning Chun held little Mingyu's hand as they walked through the northern plains. He looked at the corpses of the soldiers that littered the ground. Out of 100,000 soldiers, only less than 40,000 were left. It was an unbelievable defeat, turning the northern plains into a land of no return. The two of them silently walked in the city, their hearts gradually sinking. Step by step, they only saw broken spears and young faces. There was no fear of death, only reluctance to part with their loved ones. My blood, my bones, from now on, may the heavens take pity on me. I hope that after death, I will become a war spirit and protect the land of Great Xia forever. Beside the fallen general, 27 words were written in blood on a broken flag. Ning Chun silently bent down and picked up the blood-stained flag, his heart heavy. Beiwu Marquis deserves to die. Ning Chun's hands cracked. The corpses of tens of thousands of soldiers could not be buried. Beiwu Marquis' sins could not be redeemed even with 10,000 deaths. Little Mingyu was silent. She took in the bleakness in her eyes. Facing the soldiers who used their lives to protect the land behind them, all words seemed to pale in comparison. All differences in standpoints, all schemes had disappeared along with the lives that had been lost. All that was left was the deepest respect for the soldiers who used their blood to protect their country. There shouldn't be war, Mingyu said softly. If you are in power, you have to worry about the people. I don't know if the division between countries is right or wrong, but the existence of war is definitely wrong, Ning Chun said solemnly. Mingyu nodded, taking Ning Chun's words into her heart. Chapter 96. Little Mingyu was not used to the coldness of Beijing Plain, so Ning Chun carried her on his back and left quickly. He planted a seed of peace for little Mingyu, hoping that one day she would grow stronger. He could not change Fan Lingyue, so he could only try to change the future ruler of Beimeng. The world had been ravaged by war for too long and could not continue fighting. After passing through Beijing Plain, Great Xia's Xingqiao Pass was not far away. Ning Chun and little Mingyu walked for an entire night and finally reached their destination before noon the next day. Ning Chun put on the mask that he had prepared beforehand and disguised himself as a middle-aged man. He held little Mingyu's hand and openly walked into Xingqiao Pass. Xingqiao Pass was currently guarded by Marquis Qinghe. Before the war between the two dynasties ended, this Marquis, with the highest seniority in Great Xia, would continue to guard this place. Great Xia had already lost Yanggui City and could not afford to lose Xingqiao Pass. After Ning Chun arrived at Xingqiao Pass, he first brought little Mingyu to an inn and then asked the little girl to make a mask for him. Where are you going? Mingyu asked curiously as she helped the bad guy with his makeup. To the Marquis government, Ning Chun said honestly. The old Marquis of Xingqiao Pass was Zhang Xuan's father. He had received too much kindness from Zhang Xuan's family. Since he was here, he had to pay him a visit. Oh, Mingyu nodded and did not ask further. Once she heard this, she knew very well that she could not follow. Be careful, Mingyu reminded him. I'm fine, Ning Chun replied calmly. Although he heard that the old Marquis was somewhat old-fashioned, he could not be impolite this time. After the mask was done, it would take about an hour to dry. Ning Chun calmed down and thought for a while before taking out a brush and ink. He took out the moon-shaped jade pendant and dipped it in the ink before gently imprinting it on the paper. Mingyu's face was filled with worry. She had a feeling that the bad guy's trip would not go smoothly. Ning Chun saw the worry in the little girl's eyes and reached out to rub her hair. He said softly, "Don't worry, nothing will happen." After waiting for a while, Ning Chun took off the mask on his face and changed into his original middle-aged appearance. He then got up and walked out of the door. Wait for me to return. Ning Chun left with a solemn expression. He hoped that nothing bad would happen to him. The temporary Wu Ho government in the Qing Dynasty Pass was about an hour's journey from the inn. Before Ning Chun reached the Wu Ho government, he purposely found a secluded place to change his mask. When he appeared again, he was already an ordinary-looking young man. After half an hour, Ning Chen finally arrived at the Wuhou government. In front of the government, there were 2 guards dressed in battle armor, standing upright. I have a matter to discuss with the Marshal Marquis. I hope that the general can pass the message on my behalf. Ning Chen took out the letter in his hand and handed it over to one of the guards as he spoke politely. Wait here. The guard took the letter. He didn't say anything superfluous and didn't make things difficult for him. He turned around and walked into the mansion. A moment later, the guard returned and respectfully said, "The Marquis invites you in." Ning Chen thanked the guard and walked into the Wuhou government. In the main hall of the Marquis manor, Marquis Qinghe sat quietly on the main seat. His face was slightly aged and he looked to be in his 50s. However, he had a righteous aura that was very oppressive. "You're Ning Chen's?" Marquis Clear River sized up the young man before him and spoke calmly. "That's right." Ning Chen nodded. "You don't look like the portrait that Wu Yu gave me."
Take off the mask.
Marquis Qinghe said indifferently. As expected, I can't hide from the Marquis." Ning Chen removed the mask and revealed his true face. He then respectfully bowed. "Junior Ning Chen greets the Marquis." "Not bad." Marquis Qinghe nodded. His calmness had a trace of praise. "You are the one who kidnapped Northern Meng's young emperor, right?" Marquis Qinghe's tone didn't have much surprise as he asked.
Yes.
Ning Chen did not deny it and nodded. "There are 2 letters here. One is from His Majesty, and the other is from Wu Yu. Take a look." While speaking, Marquis Qinghe's hand moved and the 2 letters turned into a stream of light that flew towards Ning Chen. Ning Chen received the 2 letters. After opening them, he read them one by one. There was no change in his expression. He already knew the attitude of Emperor Xia and Chang Sunday. Now that he read it again, he wouldn't be surprised. Emperor Xia's letter clearly stated that once he was discovered to have entered Xingqiao Pass, he was to immediately stop him at all costs, regardless of life or death. As for Northern Meng's young emperor, he had to be sent back to the imperial city alive. As expected, Chang Sun's letter tactfully begged for mercy. Between the words and the brush, he did his best to ask for Ning Chen to hand over the young emperor voluntarily. Finally, he repeatedly warned his father not to use force. The 2 letters with completely different tones represented the final attitude of the current emperor and empress of the Grand Xia. This was unfortunate for Ning Chen, but also an honor. "What are your thoughts?" Marquis Qinghe asked. "I don't have any thoughts. I already expected this." Ning Chen waved his hand and returned the letter. "This is Emperor Xia's world. His Majesty's words are imperial edicts. This is Grand Xia's world, not Emperor Xia's. As for imperial edicts, they are meaningless to me," Ning Chen said coldly. "Outrageous." Marquis Qinghe's expression immediately sank. He coldly snorted and said, "Men, capture this brat for me."
Yes.
As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 generals entered and quickly surrounded Ning Chen. "Senior Marquis, I only came to visit you because you are the Empress father. This is my due courtesy. However, that doesn't mean that I will give up without a fight." Ning Chen's expression also sank. "Then let me see what you're capable of."
Attack.
Marquis Qinghe shouted coldly. Clang, clang. The 4 generals unsheathed their swords, and a powerful stench of blood wafted out. These generals, who had been through hundreds of battles, were abnormally powerful. Each one of them was at least at rank 8. Ning Chen's expression became extremely grave. His feet moved, and he took the initiative to attack. His figure flashed, and the black sword wrapped in cloth appeared behind him. His sword light slashed down towards one of the generals.
Bang.
The swords and sabers collided. Ning Chen used his peerless foundation to force the general back half a step. However, at the same time, 3 sword lights arrived behind him. He couldn't get away in that half a step. Ning Chen's body trembled. His sword light turned around and knocked away 2 of the sword lights. The powerful backlash caused his blood and qi to churn. The final attack was unavoidable. Ning Chen's left hand formed a sword finger. True qi overflowed, and he met the general's attack head-on. The 2 sword fingers collided. Ning Chen was unable to use the power of the sword qi. The sword qi entered his body, and blood flowed out of his mouth. Seeing that there was no advantage in this prolonged battle, Ning Chen made a prompt decision. His sword moved, and snow filled the sky. He raised his cultivation to its peak. Flying swan feather, one sword of heaven and earth. His sword was as fast as lightning, and it once more shot towards the general, who had already retreated half a step. Then, with a boom, the general received the attack and retreated several steps. Ning Chen took a step forward, wanting to leave. However, at this moment, Marquis Qinghe attacked. His body was like a streak of light, and he instantly arrived in front of Ning Chen. His finger pierced through his forehead. Bang! Ning Chen's body trembled, and he was suddenly sent flying. He vomited blood, and it dyed the sky. In this moment of life and death, Ning Chen forcefully endured the pain all over his body. He took a step forward, and using the remaining force, he turned and rushed out of the Marquis estate. Chase him. We must capture him alive, and ask him where the Northern Meng Emperor is. Marquis Qinghe's face sunk. Yes. The 4 generals accepted the order and quickly chased after him. Seeing the 4 of them disappear, Marquis Qinghe glanced at the darkness and sighed. He then turned and walked into the hall. Wuyo, this is all your father can do. The rest will depend on his own luck. Ning Chen immediately put on his mask after escaping the Marquis estate. Blood continuously flowed from his mouth as he staggered toward the crowd. The 4 generals followed closely behind him. They chased him for over 10 streets, but they lost him in front of an inn. Go in and search, said one of the generals. Yes. The remaining 3 generals nodded and walked in together. The inn's manager was just about to stop them, but when he saw that it was the 4 armored generals, he immediately shut his mouth. On the 2nd floor, the door to a room was pushed open with a bang. Little Mingyue jumped in fright, but when she saw that it was Ning Chen, she let out a sigh of relief. There will be people coming in a bit. Help me cover up. Ning Chen endured his injuries and quickly said, Okay. Mingyue saw that his expression was not right and quickly agreed. Ning Chen quickly took off his outer clothes and stuffed them into the bedside cabinet. Then he lay down on the bed. Dang dang. The next moment there was a knock on the door. Before little Mingyue could open the door, a general pushed the door open and entered. Sir. Mingyue pretended to panic and took 2 steps back as she spoke timidly. The general saw that it was a little girl and frowned. He walked into the room and looked around. When he saw the pale and sickly middle-aged man on the bed, he dispelled his doubts and turned to leave. Mingyue closed the door. Just as she walked to the bedside, she saw Ning Chen spit out a mouthful of blood. He covered his mouth and coughed. What's wrong? Don't scare me. Little Mingyue panicked. She used her sleeve to wipe the blood from his mouth, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not wipe it all away. Marquis Qinghe did not hold back in his last move. There were too many spies in the Marquis estate, so he could not hold back. I'm fine. Ning Chen gently pushed little Mingyue away and sat on the bed to rest. When he attacked just now, he really thought that he might not be able to come back. He thought that the conversation would not go smoothly and might even end on bad terms. However, on account of Zhang Sun, Marquis Qinghe would not be too ruthless. He did not expect Marquis Qinghe's attitude to be so intense. It was only after that finger attack that he instantly understood that Marquis Qinghe was acting for the people in the dark. That finger attack did not hold back, but there were many more things. The cultivation technique of Zhang Sun's lineage, and the old Marquis's 10 years of cultivation. This was already his limit. The old Marquis was at the peak of ranked 9, and was even a half step in born expert. 10 years of cultivation was enough to forcefully raise an ordinary person without any foundation above rank 5. In his dantian, the 2 cyclones were constantly devouring the endless energy that was pouring in. Ning Chen's cultivation was also constantly rising. Late stage rank 7, peak rank 7, early stage rank 8, mid stage rank 8, late stage rank 8, peak rank 8. However, just as his cultivation was about to break through to ranked 9, Ningchen forcefully stopped the expansion of the cyclones and forcefully suppressed his realm. He could not break through to rank 9 yet. Otherwise, his foundation would be unstable and it would affect his future cultivation. After a moment, Ningchen slowly opened his eyes and sighed in his heart. The old Marquis had given him too much of a favor. Chapter 97. Marquis Qinghe's loyalty to Great Xia had never been doubted. This old Marquis was bestowed the title of Marquis by the late emperor. He had spent his entire life guarding the borders of Great Xia and had worked hard without any complaints. The peace of Xia was fought for by generations of martial marquises. The borders of Xia were too big. If not for these martial marquises, they would have been trampled into a wasteland by the cavalry of other dynasties. As the only surviving martial marquis of the previous generation, Marquis Qinghe's prestige in Xia was unparalleled. Even Marquis Kaishian, who was the head of the 10 martial marquises, could not compare. However, Emperor Xia's recent actions had chilled the heart of this old Marquis. Marquis government. Marquis Qinghe stood in the middle of the hall. In front of him, 4 generals were kneeling, looking ashamed. Forfeit your salary for 3 months. Go back, Marquis Qinghe said indifferently. Yes. The 4 generals bowed respectfully, then stood up and left. After the 4 of them left, Marquis Qinghe quietly looked out of Marquis government. His calm eyes flashed with deep fatigue. Xia, who had been invincible for 1,000 years, had fallen to the point where they had to rely on a young man to support them. How sad, how laughable. He knew from Wuxia that Ningchen had already sent the news of Marquis Beiwu's betrayal to the imperial city. However, he did not expect that Emperor Xia, in order to lure out the rebel forces within Xia, would watch as Yangui city was destroyed. In the end, the 170,000 soldiers and millions of civilians were completely slaughtered by the Northern Meng army. It could be said that half of Xia's precarious situation was caused by Emperor Xia's own hands. As a subject, he had to be loyal to Emperor Xia. However, he was even more loyal to Xia that he had protected for his entire life. He was very clear about what Ningchen had done. It could even be said that if not for this young man, Xia would be in an even worse state in this war. He believed in his own judgment, and even more so in his daughter's judgment of people. Therefore, he was willing to take a gamble. 10 years of cultivation was nothing to him. He would not be able to enter the Xiantian realm in this lifetime. He might as well help this young man this once. He only hoped that his decision this time would bring new hope to Xia, and not the beginning of destruction. Ningchen didn't know what the old Marquis was thinking, but he knew that he owed him a favor that could never be repaid. 10 years of cultivation was not something that any martial artist could casually give up, not to mention that the old Marquis was already very old. Losing 10 years of cultivation would definitely cause great damage to his vitality and even cause permanent damage to his own foundation. Mingyu had been quietly guarding by the bedside, her delicate little face filled with worry. It's fine now. Ningchen woke up from his meditation and rubbed the little girl's hair. Although the injuries on his body were not light, they were nothing compared to what he had obtained. He couldn't stay in this inn any longer. He and little Mingyu had to leave as soon as possible. He had wasted a lot of time recuperating, and the sky outside was gradually darkening. However, this was a good thing for them. Every day at this time was the time when people who left early and returned late returned home. There were relatively more pedestrians on the streets. In addition, the sky was dark, which made it more convenient for them to leave. Let's go. Thinking of this, Ningchen put on his coat, held Mingyu's hand, and walked out of the door. Along the way, the pedestrians walked back and forth. The 2 of them didn't stand out as they walked, and soon disappeared into the night. In the next 2 days, the Qing dynasty pass was under martial law. The places where Ningchen had appeared were checked over and over again. No one knew that Ningchen had brought little Mingyu to another city 300 li away from the Qing dynasty pass, and they had stayed there for 5 days. His injuries couldn't be delayed any longer. He had to calm down and heal. Moreover, he needed time to cultivate the cultivation method that the old Marquis had given him. This was the martial arts of the Zhangsun branch. There were mental cultivation methods and moves. He didn't lack mental cultivation methods. What he lacked was the method to cultivate the moves. There were very few sword moves in the martial arts of the Zhangsun branch. Moreover, the old Marquis and the Marquis of Taiping weren't sword users. Fortunately, he didn't have to learn sword moves. He wasn't a sword fanatic like Prince Yan. He didn't mind learning any martial arts as long as it was useful. In the path of martial arts, the most taboo was to be impatient. Ning Chen didn't dare to learn too much. He only chose one sword move and one of the 3 palms. The old Marquis only taught one sword move and 3 palms. He was probably afraid that Ning Chen was young and impetuous and would be greedy. Any martial arts in the world had its unique way of cultivating. Ning Chen spent 5 days healing and cultivating before he had a preliminary grasp of the sword move and the palm move. 5 days later, Ning Chen took little Mingyue on the road again. They needed to get to the Heaven's Gate as soon as possible. After another 3 days, the 2 of them came to 5 li away from the Heaven's Gate and stopped moving forward. Ning Chen looked at the mighty Great Xia Pass in front of him, knowing that this was the last problem in front of him. It was definitely impossible to force their way through. Fan Lingyue must have left a real powerhouse in this extremely important place. If they forced their way through, they would only be courting death. The only choice was to pass through the Qizhou mountain range on both sides of the Heaven's Gate. The Qizhou mountain range stretched for nearly 10,000 li, forcibly dividing the territory of the Great Xia into 2 halves. The place where the Heaven's Gate was located was the most gentle of the mountains, but it still took a lot of manpower and material resources of the Great Xia to build. The Qizhou mountain range was a true primitive land. Very few people dared to set foot in it. However, Ning Chen had no choice but to pass through it. "Are you scared?" Ning Chen looked at the little girl beside him and asked.
No.
Mingyue nodded firmly. She was the Empress of the Northern Meng. How could she be scared by such a small difficulty?
Good job.
Ning Chen gave her a thumbs up. As they spoke, the 2 of them had already set foot on the road across the Qizhou mountain range. The mountain road was rugged, and every step was very difficult. The little girl's body was still very weak. She would be exhausted after a few steps, so most of the time, Ning Chen carried her on his back. The primitive land was tens of thousands of li long, rolling up and down on the ground. Ancient trees were coiled up, covering the sky and the sun. There were also old roots that were intertwined, spreading horizontally and vertically, overflowing with the aura of time. This was a divine land that had gathered the essence of heaven and earth, nourished for tens of thousands of years. It had existed since ancient times. From time to time, there would be the roars of giant beasts and the cries of hundreds of birds. It was full of vitality. There was also a dense fog that rose and fell, flickering, and its source could not be seen. It was somewhat mysterious and unpredictable. The cold moon hung in the sky, bright and clear. Gusts of cold wind blew gently, rustling the branches and leaves. The whole mountain range was gloomy and somewhat scary. Even the roars of beasts could not hide the loneliness of eternity. "Are you cold?" Ning Chen asked softly as they walked on the mountain road.
No.
Mingyue leaned on his back and gently shook her head. The bad guy's body was very warm, and she was wearing very thick clothes. "If you're tired, sleep for a while. We still have a long way to go," Ning Chen said. "Okay," Mingyue replied, but she was not sleepy. Her pearl-like eyes were wide open. "Do you want me to tell you a story?" After walking for a while, Ning Chen saw that little Mingyue was still not sleepy. He was afraid that she would be bored, so he suggested. "Okay." Mingyue nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. "I'll tell you a story about Snow White," Ning Chen recalled carefully. He did not know if he could still remember everything after not telling it for so many years. Once upon a time, there was a king. The beginning of the story was very vulgar, the middle was very complicated, but the ending was very beautiful. It was a typical fairy tale of a prince, a princess, and a bad guy. Ning Chen's mouth could even make dead things come alive, let alone telling a story. Little Mingyue was very engrossed in the story. Ning Chen smiled in his heart. She was a little girl after all. Does Fan Lingyue look like that bad queen? Ning Chen took the opportunity to instill in little Mingyue the idea that Fan Lingyue was a bad guy.
You're the bad guy.
Sister Lingyue is a good person. Little Mingyue's ability to distinguish right from wrong was very strong. She could tell Ning Chen's intention at a glance. She pouted and replied. Ning Chen rubbed his nose helplessly. His strategy had failed, and there was room for improvement. If Fan Lingyue and I fell into the water together, who would you save first? Ning Chen once again took out his trump card. Sister Lingyue. Little Mingyue said without hesitation. I doted on you for nothing. Ning Chen was very hurt. The little girl answered too quickly. It would have been good even if she pretended to hesitate. Your martial arts are so good, you can last for a long time. Sister Lingyue doesn't know martial arts, so I must save Sister Lingyue first. Mingyue hugged the bad guy's arms tightly and explained softly.
Heh.
Ning Chen laughed softly. If Fan Lingyue didn't know martial arts, then there wouldn't be any martial arts in the world. That palm strike almost killed him. However, he couldn't tell little Mingyue these things. Why don't you tell me a story? Ning Chen suggested. I don't know, the little girl said with difficulty. Then I'll tell you a joke? Ning Chen smiled strangely.
Okay.
Mingyue nodded. Once upon a time, there was a eunuch. Ning Chen opened his mouth and said nothing else. What happened next? Mingyue asked curiously. Nothing else. Ning Chen replied. Mingyue was stunned. After a long time, she finally reacted. She hit the former hard with her little hand and said with a red face, You're a bad guy. Haha, I'm just joking. Ning Chen laughed and continued, Why don't I tell you a new story? No, I want to hear a story. Mingyue pouted. What kind of story? Ning Chen asked. Little Mingyue thought for a while and said, Why don't you tell me about yourself? She knew that there weren't many people in this world who could make Sister Lingyue pay attention to them. Since the bad guy was so powerful, he must have a lot of stories to tell. Ning Chen didn't refuse. Wasn't it just telling stories about heroes? He was the best at it. Once upon a time, there was a young, handsome, confident, kind, and cute boy who entered the palace. The story was very long, mainly because a certain someone had shamelessly added too many exaggerated adjectives, resulting in a story that could be written on a palm-sized piece of paper, taking more than 2 hours to reach the part where he fell off the cliff. You don't know how big that strange bird was when I fell down. Its wings were as wide as 4 to 5 feet. Ning Chen was in the midst of telling the story vividly, but was interrupted by little Mingyue without giving him any face. You're lying. How can there be such a big bird? The other plots may be slightly exaggerated, but I didn't exaggerate at all about this. That's... Ning Chen was about to explain when he suddenly heard a deep roar coming from the sky. His calm face instantly darkened. This time, there was no need to explain. Chapter 98. Above the horizon, a huge black shadow appeared. It covered the sky and blocked all the light. It was much wider than what Ning Chen had described. Little Mingyue was nervous. She hugged Ning Chen's neck tightly. No matter how determined a little girl was, she was still afraid of this unknown monster. Chirp! The strange bird let out a long cry and swooped down towards the 2 people below. Ning Chen's eyes turned cold. He stamped his foot and turned into a silver light. With a swoosh, he slashed at the bird's abdomen. Crash! Blood sprayed out. A long wound appeared on the bird's body. However, the bird was too big. It was more than 30 meters wide. After a painful cry, it quickly left. Ning Chen landed and found that the bird had disappeared. He couldn't help but frown. What was that thing? His sword couldn't cut it open. Its body was much harder than expected. There were too many unknowns in a primitive place like the Chizhou Mountains. It seemed that he had to be more careful. Roar! Suddenly, the beast's roar shook the sky. Hundreds of birds flew away in fright. The earth shook violently, as if there was an earthquake. Little Mingyu hugged Ning Chen even tighter. The nervousness on her face became more intense. Ning Chen walked forward quietly. The ink sword in his hand was still dripping with blood. He knew that tonight wouldn't be easy. No wonder no one entered the Chizhou Mountains. Even martial artists didn't want to try. Just the strange bird just now was enough to make martial artists below the 7th rank unable to deal with it. In the past, he met one when he fell off the cliff. Today, he met another one. It seemed that this thing wasn't as rare as he thought. There were monsters every year, but there were especially many today. Boom. At this moment, the world suddenly shook. A huge fist fell from the sky. It was as heavy as a small mountain. It was so heavy that it made people breathless. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. He took half a step back. His left hand was covered in a dark yellow light. True qi flowed through his body. He gathered all his strength into one punch. With a rumbling sound, the aftermath spread out. The ancient trees around couldn't bear such a huge force. They broke apart and flew everywhere. The owner of the giant fist revealed himself. It was actually a beast ape that was about 30 meters tall. Its entire body was covered in dense brown hair. It had an ugly appearance and looked very frightening. Roar! The giant ape roared at the sky, and the terrifying sound waves turned into a gale, blowing up the fallen leaves. A mere beast dares to be so arrogant? Kneel! Ning Chen coldly snorted. His left hand opened into a palm and grabbed the giant ape's fist. The thick earth energy erupted, and he suddenly pulled it downwards. However, with a thud, the giant ape lost its balance and fell to the ground with a loud crash. For a moment, the heaven and earth shook. The ink sword moved, condensing into frost. Just as it was about to end this beast's life, it was stopped by little Mingyu. "Don't kill it," said Mingyu. Ning Chen frowned. When did little Mingyu become so soft-hearted? As an emperor, how could he be so soft-hearted? We were the ones who trespassed into its territory. It was only protecting its home, Mingyu explained softly. Fear also appeared on the giant ape's ugly face. It lowered its head to show its submission. Ning Chen was unwilling to go against little Mingyu's wishes. He withdrew his ink sword and coldly said, "Get up." Hearing this, the giant ape actually stood up, as if it could understand human language. Ning Chen looked at the path that was blocked by the big guy and frowned again. "Move aside. Don't block the way." The giant ape carefully moved aside, afraid that it would make the terrifying human in front of it unhappy again. "I'll get down and walk on my own," said Mingyu softly. "Okay," replied Ning Chen. He then squatted down and put the little girl down. Mingyu held the big hand in front of her and smiled at the big guy beside her. Then, she walked forward with small steps. Ning Chen followed and thoughtfully glanced at the giant ape. This big guy should have seen humans before, and even interacted with them for a long time. Otherwise, it shouldn't be able to understand human language. No matter how smart a creature was, it was impossible to be born with the ability to understand human language. Even humans couldn't do it, let alone a beast ape. It seemed that there were still people who had set foot in this place. However, he didn't know who was so bold and bored to actually teach a monster to understand human language. Thinking of this, Ning Chen stopped and turned around to look at the giant ape. He shouted, "Hey, big guy, have you seen humans before?"
Woo.
The giant ape nodded its head in response. "Can you bring us to take a look?" asked Ning Chen.
Woo.
The giant ape nodded again in response. Ning Chen held little Mingyu's hand, and with a stomp of his feet, he turned into a stream of light and landed on the big guy's shoulder. Then he said, "Let's go." Roar. The giant ape roared towards the sky, scaring the little girl. "Don't shout." Mingyu shouted in dissatisfaction. The giant ape immediately shut its mouth and silently took large strides forward. The trees in the primitive land were too tall. The giant ape was already 10 feet tall, but it still didn't stand out among them. It was like a child next to an adult. The giant ape's skin was rough and thick. It didn't matter if the branches and vines hit it, but little Mingyu couldn't. Therefore, the one who had the hardest time was Ning Chen. He used his true chi to protect the little girl, afraid that she would get hurt. Boom, boom, boom. Fortunately, not long after, they heard the deafening sound of a waterfall. The giant ape brought the two of them through the last part of the forest and stopped in front of the ancient pond. In front of his eyes, it suddenly opened up. On the precipice that was 1,000 feet high, one could only see the water rushing downwards. The water splashed, rolling faster and faster, rolling more and more fiercely. At the top, it was like a layer of smooth water, but at the bottom, it was like a snow-white jade belt. As it rushed downwards, it suddenly turned into an iceberg, a toppling snowy peak, collapsing downwards, directly rushing down towards the ancient pool below. The crashing sound of the waterfall was like 10,000 horses galloping, majestic and shocking to the extreme. There's actually such a treasure land in this mountain range. Ning Qin was shocked. He felt the two cyclones in his chi begin to stir, indicating that the spiritual energy here was much denser than the outside world. So beautiful. The little girl always had no resistance to beautiful things. Looking at the majestic waterfall in front of her, she was slightly dazed. Ning Chun brought the little girl down from the giant ape's shoulder and walked to the ancient pond. He touched the water. It was slightly cold, but not bone-piercing. "You play here. I'll look around," said Ning Chun. "Okay." Mingyue really liked this place and softly agreed. Ning Chun raised his head and glanced at the giant ape. He indifferently warned, "Big guy, look after little Mingyue. If anything happens to her, I'll come back and tear you apart." Woo! The giant ape fearfully nodded in response. Only then did Ning Chun relax and walk to the side. He wanted to see just what kind of person was able to awaken a monster's intelligence. If someone had lived here before, there should be some signs left behind. After all, humans and monsters were different. After searching for a while, Ning Chun finally found a stone house 300 meters away from the waterfall. The surroundings were already covered in weeds. If you didn't look carefully, you would think it was just a large rock. The door of the stone house had already been corroded by the passage of time. It looked like it had at least several hundred years of history. There wasn't much inside the house. There was only a stone bed and a stone table. There wasn't even a stool. It should have been turned to dust by the merciless passage of time. Ning Chun stepped forward and found a piece of paper on the stone table. It was an ordinary piece of paper, but it appeared so unusual in this place. Even wood couldn't withstand the erosion of time and turn to dust, but an ordinary piece of paper could be preserved in good condition. There were a few words written on the paper. They were very clear and not difficult to understand. Encountered a little beast ape. Mother passed away. My heart was compassionate. I protected you for 10 years and left. Ji Taisher, there were only a few words written on the paper. There was no other words. The content didn't seem to be anything special. But the name signed at the end shocked Ning Chun greatly. Ji Taisher, 3 simple words, but they were more important than Mount Tai. The first imperial tutor of Xia, the head of the 3 ministers, the founder of Confucianism 1,000 years ago. He was also known as the Master. The rule that the 3 ministers were not allowed to interfere in politics was also set by the Master. The 1,000 years of Xia were inseparable from the contributions of Confucianism. Although Confucianism was gradually corrupted by power, it was undeniable that without Confucianism, Xia wouldn't have been invincible for 1,000 years. It could be said that these 1,000 years were Confucianism's 1,000 years. Even the brilliance of Eternal Night sect was somewhat suppressed by Confucianism. Eternal Night sect believed in God, while Confucianism believed in human. The two were in fierce conflict and couldn't tolerate each other. In today's world, the only orthodoxy that could be compared to Eternal Night sect was Confucianism. This was also the reason why Xia could prosper for so long. 1,000 years ago, God's ideology was so powerful. To be able to establish Confucianism under such conditions, one could see how amazing the Master was at that time. The Master opened the spiritual wisdom of the people of Xia. They no longer blindly believed in God, and this made the world more rational and less ignorant. Ever since then, in Great Xia, teachers could no longer use the word teacher casually. Those who could be called teacher were all university quizzes. Ning Chen knew all this clearly, so he wasn't shocked by this. What shocked him was that he had seen the handwriting on the paper before. He had stayed in the academy for 2 months. There was also a master in the academy who looked very old. The master was very old, so old that he almost couldn't write anymore. In the entire academy, he was probably the only one who had seen the master write. At that time, his legs had just been crippled and he couldn't adapt to anything.
His whole body slowed down.
He learned slowly and walked slowly. Fortunately, he met the master, who was also very slow. Therefore, other than chopping firewood, he liked to listen to the master's classes the most. On the night before he left the academy, he talked to the master for an entire night. They talked about many things, including many secrets that had been buried in his heart for a long time. He even told the master that he wasn't from this world. The master didn't say anything. He only wrote 4 words, "Go with the flow." It was written in the snow and disappeared with the wind. He didn't notice it at that time. It wasn't until today, when he saw the words on the paper, that he remembered. This matter was too shocking and too unbelievable. The master from 1,000 years ago was still alive. Chapter 99. The headmaster was in the academy. Ning Chen was so shocked that he was speechless. 1,000 years had passed. Was the headmaster still alive? But he had never heard of anyone who could live for more than 1,000 years, not even an innate expert. He did not know how long an innate expert could live in this world. 300 years, 400 years, or 500 years. But it was definitely not 1,000 years. Moreover, the headmaster did not have the aura of a warrior. No matter when, there was no sign that the headmaster had practiced martial arts. Not 1,000 years ago, not 1,000 years later. On the other hand, the headmaster was really old. He was so old that he was like an ordinary old man with 1 foot in the grave. The feeling of having 1 foot in the grave could not be deceived. He even felt that the headmaster could not live for more than 10 years. He could not understand. If the headmaster of the academy was really the headmaster, then how did he survive the past 1,000 years? He could see that the headmaster was struggling. He was like an ordinary old man who was fighting against time and refused to leave. Why was the headmaster holding on so bitterly? Ning Chen could not figure it out. He tried to pick up the paper on the table to see what was going on. However, as soon as his hand touched it, the paper quickly turned to ash. Although the headmaster's brush and ink helped the paper resist the erosion of time, it had reached its limit. After all, the human body was contaminated with too much of the aura of the mortal world. The paper, which had been close to the boundary point, could not bear it anymore. Ning Chen sighed in his heart and turned to leave. It seemed that he had to go back to the academy and ask the headmaster himself when he had time. Chirp, chirp, suddenly, a series of shocking cries sounded in the sky. Ning Chen's expression changed instantly. His figure flashed, and he rushed to where little Mingyu was. He covered a distance of 1,000 feet in the blink of an eye. He saw the giant ape grab a huge stone and throw it into the sky. In the dark sky, the huge stone hit one of the strange birds. It screamed miserably, and a lot of feathers fell. However, there were too many strange birds, and they were too strong. It was not a problem that the giant ape could solve with 1 or 2 stones. Okay, you protect little Mingyu.
Leave the rest to me.
Ning Chen looked up at the dark sky and narrowed his eyes slightly. Wu, the giant ape, responded with a trace of fear. Useless. The headmaster taught you, for 10 years in vain. As soon as he finished speaking, Ning Chen stomped his foot and turned into a silver light that shot into the sky. In the next moment, the sword light tore through the sky, drawing a black brilliance in the 9 heavens. Then, blood sprayed out and a large amount of blood sprinkled down. Warriors below the Xiantian realm couldn't stay in the air for a long time. As Ning Chen landed, he stepped on the body of a strange bird. Then, he rose up again and flew towards the highest flying strange bird in the sky. This was the strange bird that he had slashed earlier. Its feathers were still stained with blood, but its wounds were gradually healing at an astonishing speed. Chirp! The leader of the strange birds in the sky screamed. The 4 strange birds circling around it immediately swooped down and crashed into the humans in the sky. A flying feather, a sword of heaven and earth. In the dazzling silver light, Ningchen turned into a huge silver sword and pierced through the bodies of the 2 strange birds. The black sword condensed into frost and cut through the sky, illuminating the entire sky.
Whoosh!
There was a terrifying cry as one of the strange bird leader's wings was chopped off by the black sword. Blood sprayed out like rain. The leader of the strange birds could no longer support itself with a broken wing. It screamed miserably and then quickly fell down. The rest of the strange birds panicked and flew towards their leader in large groups. In a panic, they used their bodies to support the latter and hurriedly escaped. However, at this moment, Ning Chen's sword arrived again. He stepped on the body of the strange bird leader and cut open the other wing. Fresh blood splattered all over the strange birds below. Their screams became more and more panicked. They flapped their huge wings with all their might, desperately trying to escape. Ning Chen's cold eyes showed no mercy. The dark yellow light around his body flickered, and the chi of thick earth exploded. With a heavy kick, he kicked the leader of the strange birds down. The strange birds below couldn't bear the sudden weight. They screamed in fear and helplessness as they watched their leader fall and crash onto the ground. "It's your turn!" Ning Chen snorted coldly and used the momentum to land on the body of a strange bird. His sword pierced through the bird's body and directly stabbed into its back. In the next moment, the black sword slashed across the strange bird's body and directly cut it in half. Seeing this miserable situation, the rest of the strange birds couldn't bear the fear in their hearts and frantically fled. They were afraid that if they were a little slower, they would end up being cut into pieces. Ning Chen landed from the sky and didn't chase after them. This warning was enough. He couldn't kill all the strange birds, and there was no need to. Of the 2 strange birds, one was dead, and one was injured. The injured one was breathing out more than it was breathing in. Its wings were chopped off, and it fell from such a high altitude. It was already dead. Beside the ancient pond, little Mingyu was well protected by the giant ape. Not a single drop of blood was stained on her. This made Ning Chen very satisfied.
Woo!
Seeing the terrifying human walking over, the giant ape didn't just express its submission. There was also a trace of struggle in its eyes. The giant ape was too tall, so Ning Chen didn't notice it. He took little Mingyu and was about to leave.
Woo!
The wild desire finally won over the fear. The giant ape nervously stopped the 2 and glanced at the strange birds in the distance with a pleading expression. Ning Chen stopped and frowned. He didn't understand what was going on. Little Mingyu seemed to understand a little. She pulled the former sleeve and pointed at the strange bird. "It seems like it wants something from the big strange bird." "Woo-woo." The giant ape nodded. Ning Chen thought for a moment and walked forward with little Mingyu. He raised his head and asked, "Where is it?" The giant ape pointed at the strange bird's head. The nervousness on its face became even more intense. "Mingyu, step back," Ning Chen said softly. "Okay." Mingyu obediently took a few steps back. Ning Chen reached out and touched the strange bird's head. He sent his true chi into it. A moment later, his eyes narrowed. It could actually sense spiritual chi.
Swish!
He unsheathed his ink sword and cut open the strange bird's head. As blood sprayed out, a walnut-sized green bead flew out. Ning Chen went forward and grabbed it. He looked at it carefully, but couldn't find anything. He then casually tossed it to the big guy.
"Take it."
"Woo-woo." The giant ape's nervous expression instantly turned into joy. It took the bead and ate it without saying anything.
"What is that?"
Little Mingyu was disgusted and asked with a strange expression. "I also don't know." Ning Chen shook his head. He couldn't see anything special about it. It was like a condensation of spiritual chi. He had never heard of such a thing. The probability of it appearing should be very small. No wonder this strange bird's body was so sturdy. It was obviously about to become a spirit. Roar! At this moment, the giant ape suddenly looked up and roared. Its entire body emitted a green light, and then it quickly shrank. 30 meters, 20 meters, 15 meters, the light became brighter and brighter. The giant ape also shrank until it was about the same height as little Mingyu. Then it gradually stopped. After shrinking, the giant ape didn't look so ugly and funny anymore. Instead, it looked much cuter. Little Mingyu's eyes bloomed with joy. She reached out and patted the giant ape's head. She was very surprised. Ningchen couldn't figure it out, but he didn't think too much about it. The teacher could live for 1,000 years.
What was so strange about this?
Let's go. Ningchen held little Mingyu's hand. After such a long delay, they still had to hurry on. Mingyu reluctantly looked at the giant ape and followed with small steps. Woo-woo. The giant ape grabbed the corner of the little girl's clothes and followed them. Ningchen stopped and frowned again. He asked, "You want to go with us?" Woo. The giant ape nodded, looking uneasy. Ningchen looked at little Mingyu and sighed in his heart. Wasn't it just raising a monkey? As long as little Mingyu was happy. Follow if you want. After saying that, Ningchen held little Mingyu's hand and continued walking. The giant ape was delighted and followed them. Mingyu was in a good mood. She said sweetly, "Let's give it a name." Xiao Huang. Ningchen said casually. Mingyu pursed her lips. She was a little dissatisfied, but she still accepted the name. Xiao Huang it was. It was a little unpleasant to hear, but it was easy to remember. After the two people and the ape left, the stone house outside the waterfall finally couldn't withstand the continuous shaking and collapsed. It completely buried the traces of the teacher's life. The cold night was still a little cold. The bright moon hung high in the sky, sprinkling the cold water on the ground. After going around the big waterfall, there was an endless mountain range. The Chizhou mountain range was very big. If they wanted to cross it, they would have to cross at least 2 mountains. They were not even halfway there. There was less than 2 hours before dawn. After walking for a while, little Mingyu became sleepy and fell asleep on Ningchen's back. Ningchen didn't stop and continued walking. The little ape followed behind him. They walked lightly, not daring to disturb the little girl who was sleeping soundly. The second mountain range was much bigger than the first. The moment Ningchen set foot on it, he felt a little uneasy. A martial artist's perception was much more sensitive than ordinary people. This feeling was as if he was being watched by something terrifying. He was at the peak of the 8th rank. Something that could make him feel uneasy was at least equivalent to the 8th rank of a human, or even higher. The little ape also became restless. It looked left and right but couldn't find anything. Ningchen walked forward silently. He became more and more alert. With little Mingyu beside him, he didn't dare to be careless. In the Sea of Qi and his Dantian, the silver cyclone and the dark yellow cyclone rotated at the same time. Traces of vital essence flowed out and formed an invisible net around 3 steps, guarding against any accidents. The little ape's restlessness calmed down a little. It followed behind, still looking left and right carefully. After walking for more than an hour, the bright moon hanging high in the sky gradually set. The first ray of dawn was just about to arrive. The moment when night and day alternated, the world around them changed instantly. A big crack suddenly opened in the shaking world. It was like the mouth of a giant beast, swallowing the 2 people and the ape above. The next moment, the crack closed with a bang. The world returned to normal. The cold wind blew, and the fallen leaves danced. In the blink of an eye, all traces were covered. It was as if nothing had happened. Chapter 100. The wind whistled past his ears, and his body fell faster and faster. At this critical moment, Ningchen pulled out his black sword and stabbed it into the stone wall in front of him, stopping his fall. The little ape hugged the former's leg and barely managed to stop its body. Ningchen looked down and saw that it was so dark that he couldn't see the end of it. The The path above was sealed, and the bottom was so deep that he couldn't see the end. It was really difficult to go up and down. Little Mingyu was also awakened by this sudden movement. Looking at the darkness around her, she subconsciously hugged the only thing she could rely on. "I'm here.
It'll be fine."
Ningchen comforted her gently. "Okay." Mingyu hugged him even tighter. "Hold on tight. We're going down." As soon as he finished speaking, Ningchen pulled out the sword that was stuck in the stone wall, and his body fell down again. Just like this, Ningchen would use his black sword to slow down his fall every few dozen feet. Little Mingyu was protected by his true qi and was safe. After a long time, the two finally reached the ground. The little ape also obediently stayed on the side and watched. It didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Ningchen took out a match and blew on it. He saw a path in front of him with the light. This was the only path. Ningchen walked forward. After walking for a while, he gradually saw a light far away. It was very clear, but it wasn't the light of the sun. It was the unique spiritual light of a martial artist. He was also a martial artist, so he wasn't unfamiliar with this kind of light. However, this kind of invisible pressure faintly suppressed any powerhouse he had ever seen. Ningchen was very shocked. How could there be such a powerhouse in this kind of place? There was no doubt that this person was at least one of the 5 strongest Xiantian powerhouses in the world. He might even surpass them. The spiritual light coming from the distance was very peaceful. It didn't have the slightest bit of evil. It was like a calm ocean, boundless and containing all things. Ningchen continued to walk forward. He wanted to see exactly who this person was. If a powerhouse of this level had evil intentions, they wouldn't even have a chance to escape. It didn't matter if it was far or near. After 100 steps, the space suddenly changed. Everything around Ningchen changed. Even Mingyu and the little ape disappeared. In front of him, a purple guqin was playing by itself. The formless sound of the great Tao spread out in circles, silently cleansing the souls of those who entered. An illusion. Ningchen narrowed his eyes as he looked at the zither in front of him. The same situation had happened to him in the Great Hall of the Netherworld. It was very strange, and people couldn't tell if it was real or fake. In the end, the little white horse swallowed something to save him. In the state of consciousness, everything you see is real. Just at this moment, a violet-robed youth slowly walked out and sat by the zither, gently stroking its strings. Ningchen was startled. Was this that powerful cultivator? At such a close distance, he didn't feel that formless pressure. "Senior, may I ask where this place is?" Ningchen stepped forward and bowed respectfully. In the belly of a Taotai, the purple-clothed young man stopped playing the zither and raised his head to answer calmly. "Taotai," Ningchen frowned. Wasn't this a mythical monster? It actually existed. Legend has it that the Taotai was one of the sons of the dragon. It was extremely greedy and gluttonous and could devour everything in the world. It was a monster that had only appeared in ancient myths and legends. "Can you let me see the heavenly book in your body?" At this moment, the purple-clothed young man spoke. Ningchen's body trembled. How could this person know that he had a heavenly book? The purple-clothed young man smiled faintly and said, "No need to be surprised. 1,000 years ago, I also had a heavenly book, so I'm more sensitive to its aura." Hearing this, Ningchen's eyes narrowed. 1,000 years ago again? Didn't that mean that this person had also lived for 1,000 years? "May I ask for senior's name?" Ningchen bowed respectfully again and asked. "Jiang Wangji." The purple-clothed young man thought for a moment and softly replied. It had been too long since anyone had asked for his name, so he had forgotten it. Dao Kuei's. Ningchen's heart trembled. The person in front of him was the head of the Dao sect from 1,000 years ago. The Dao sect had existed for much longer than the Confucian sect. It could even be compared to the Eternal Night sect. However, it had been destroyed 1,000 years ago, and its orthodoxy had ended. Once, the Book of Moon in the Heavenly Book belonged to the Dao sect. After the Dao sect was destroyed, the Book of Moon also disappeared. It only reappeared 100 years ago, and was obtained by the Eternal Night sect. It would be a lie to say that he was not shocked to meet such an old antique here. However, with the cultivation of the person in front of him, there was really no need for him to lie. Ning Chen no longer had any doubts. He activated his internal energy, and the cyclone in his dantian rotated. 2 broken pages of the heavenly book slowly flew out and floated in front of him. Book of Life, Book of Earth. Jiang Wangji's knowledge was extraordinary. He could tell the origin of the heavenly book at a glance.
He was not too surprised.
Everyone had their own opportunities. Obtaining 2 heavenly books could only mean that the young man in front of him was luckier than the average person. Ning Chen took back the 2 heavenly books. He finally knew the name of the other heavenly book. Book of Earth? It was much more impressive than the Book of Dust. Is the headmaster still alive? Jiang Wangji suddenly asked. Ning Chen's expression froze, and then he felt relieved. Dao Kuei and the headmaster were from the same era. It was not strange that they knew each other. He should be alive, but I am still not sure, Ning Chen answered honestly. Jiang Wangji thought for a while and said, he should be in a place called Tiansong Academy. 1,000 years ago, he told me that he was going to build such an academy. At this moment, Ning Chen was finally 100% sure that the old headmaster in the academy was the headmaster from 1,000 years ago. If so, the headmaster is still alive. However, I have a feeling that the headmaster may not be able to hold on for more than 10 years, Ning Chen said seriously. Sigh. Jiang Wangji sighed softly. Even someone as amazing as the headmaster could not withstand the merciless passage of time. 1,000 years is too long. Ning Chen hesitated for a moment. He could no longer suppress the doubts in his heart and asked, Senior, can a human really live for more than 1,000 years? Impossible. Jiang Wangji shook his head. Then he looked at the space around him and continued, Do you know why I am voluntarily trapped in this place? Senior, please tell me, Ning Chen said respectfully. Because in the stomach of the Taotai, the flow of time is slower than outside. I am not as good as the headmaster, so I can only use this method to survive this long 1,000 years. As for the headmaster's method, you will not understand it, and you don't need to understand it. However, any method of immortality has a price. No one is an exception. Jiang Wangji's voice was filled with endless exhaustion. Even though he was in the stomach of the Taotai, he could not hold on any longer. 1,000 years had already exhausted him. Ning Chen's eyes were filled with shock and confusion. Senior and the headmaster did not seem like people who are afraid of death. Why did they have to hold on so bitterly and live through this 1,000 years that was worse than death? I know you have doubts, but I can't say it now. Otherwise, it will cause unnecessary changes. The headmaster and I can't hold on for much longer. There can't be any more accidents. As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Wangji got up and walked to the front of the young man in front of him. He stretched out his right hand and gently touched the young man's forehead. Immediately, a Haotian Taoism cultivation method was reflected in his mind. I know that the life scroll only has mental cultivation methods and no moves. The moves recorded in this cultivation method are the most suitable Haotian Taoism secret method besides the original forbidden move in the life scroll. I don't have many requests. I just hope that you can live well, live at all costs. Then, try your best to find the Nothing Scroll. Remember, don't tell anyone that the headmaster and I are alive. As for the way out, just go back the way you came. In a while, I will disturb the Taotia senses again and make it think that it is time to eat. When it opens its mouth, you rush out immediately. I will also help you. As he spoke, the surrounding space suddenly shattered. The purple figure also turned into stars and disappeared between heaven and earth. Ning Chen came to his senses and found that little Mingyu had been guarding him worriedly. Her little hands were tightly grasped for fear that he would disappear if she could not hold him. Time was of the essence. Ning Chen did not have time to say more. He held little Mingyu in his arms and rushed back the way they came. The little ape beast roared and quickly followed after him. The next moment, the spiritual light of the martial artist behind him became brighter, like a purple sun. Ning Chen knew that this was the senior interfering with the Taoye senses. Rumble. Suddenly, the earth shook. In the sky ahead, a huge mouth opened. A bright light shone down. It was extremely bright. It was the first light of dawn. Let's go. Ning Chen's aura exploded. He rolled up the little ape and turned into a stream of light that soared into the sky. At the same time, a vast power appeared out of thin air. A soft palm rushed over and helped him escape from the Taoye's stomach. After Ning Chen left, the huge gully quickly closed. In the deepest part of the Taoye's stomach, Jiang Wangji looked at the slowly disappearing sunlight in the distance and sighed softly. He had not seen this kind of warm light for a long time. He was a person from 1,000 years ago.
He could no longer see the light.
His existence was no longer tolerated by heaven and earth. Once he went out, he would soon disappear. He had waited for 1,000 years, hoping that he could catch up. This young man was not bad. Not everyone could listen to the soul-leaving song of Haotian Taoism. He was fine, which meant that his nature was not bad. He was not greedy and not arrogant. He was a trustworthy person. For 1,000 years, those who were swallowed by the Taotai had basically died. Even if they did not die, in the end, no one could pass the test of the soul-leaving song. Human greed was essentially no different from the Taotai. He had no time to wait. Fortunately, he had found one at the last moment. The no scroll was too important. He had to find it as soon as possible. Otherwise, this disaster would become a real catastrophe. Only those who had the Tomes of Arcane would have a special reaction to the Tomes of Arcane. The no scroll represented nothingness and destruction. It was the key to facing the disaster in the future. He and the headmaster were too old to stop this disaster. He only hoped that these young people 1,000 years later could shoulder this burden. The headmaster's divination skill was unparalleled. He believed that the headmaster said that there would be hope in the human world. Chapter 101. Under the first light of dawn, a silver light rushed out from the ground. After landing, it continued to run for more than 10 miles before stopping. The morning sun was a little dazzling. Little Mingyu took a while to adjust to it before opening her eyes. She looked around and saw that she was back on the ground. She couldn't help but smile. The little ape stayed aside with lingering fear. Its big round eyes looked sneaky, afraid that it would fall into that dark and strange place again. Ning Chen didn't explain anything. In fact, he was a little confused. If it wasn't for the Taoist secret method in his mind, he would have suspected that this was another illusion. Dao Kuei, Jiang Wangji, who had disappeared 1,000 years ago, actually lived to this era. What was he waiting for? He didn't hesitate to pay such a big price to survive 1,000 years. Was it worth it? Go by yourself. Ning Chen put little Mingyu down and held her little hand as he spoke softly. Okay, Mingyu said obediently. Not long after, Ning Chen heard the sound of the river, so he took little Mingyu there to rest for a while. After a tiring night, he was fine, but little Mingyu couldn't fall asleep several times. She probably couldn't take it anymore. The river was turbulent and very clear. There was no human habitation in the primitive land, so the river water was very clean. Ning Chen caught a fish, roasted it, and handed it to little Mingyu. The little girl ate one, and then fell asleep in the former's arms after eating it. The little ape stayed aside, and didn't eat anything. Since it swallowed the bead of the strange bird, its appetite for food had been greatly reduced. After little Mingyu fell asleep, Ning Chen calmed down and carefully sorted out the Taoist secret method in his mind. Taoism had existed for more than 10,000 years, and its methods had been perfected by generations of sages. It could be said that the methods of Taoism were the closest to the tomes of arcane in the world. Dao Kuei was the strongest person 1,000 years ago. It could be said that he single-handedly supported Taoism. After Dao Kuei disappeared, Taoism was quickly destroyed. Taoism was destroyed and Confucianism was flourishing. Jiang Wangji and the headmaster did the best to resist the eternal night cult. The secret method that Dao Kuei passed on to him didn't require the primordial realm like the scroll of earth, but it still required him to be at least at the peak of the 9th rank. He couldn't practice it now. This was the wisdom of Taoism over the past 10,000 years. He needed to be patient. Moreover, he hadn't fully grasped the things that the old Marquis had taught him. He still understood the principle of biting off more than he could chew. Little Mingyu was exhausted. She slept all the way until noon. The little ape picked a lot of wild fruits. After a simple meal, the two of them continued their journey. For the rest of the journey, they did not encounter any danger. Ningchen sped up again, and finally walked out of the Chizhou mountain range when the cold moon hung high in the sky. From this moment on, they had finally stepped into the heart of the Central Plains and were not far from Fan Lingyue's army. Ning Chen's mood also started to become heavy. In this world, the person he was most unwilling to face was Fan Lingyue. This woman was too intelligent, too ruthless, and almost had no weaknesses. He didn't know if little Mingyu could become Fan Lingyue's weakness, but he still had to try. Although it was despicable, this was war. There was no reason to speak of. Since the beginning of this war, Emperor Xia had already gone insane. In order to completely draw out the internal problems, he had actually let the wolf into the house and watched as Yangue City was broken. It was hard to believe that such a stupid thing would happen to an emperor. He had heard before that time could turn a wise emperor into a fatuous one and a tyrant. When one grew old, the desire for power would become even stronger, and the suspicion in one's heart would also become heavier. It wasn't that there were no examples in the history of Wuxia, but no one was as extreme as Emperor Xia. At that time, he really hoped that Emperor Xia had died on that mountain, even if Great Xia would be in chaos for a while. If Emperor Xia died, Great Xia would be in chaos. If he didn't die, Great Xia would be even more chaotic. The current situation of Great Xia was much worse than before. If it wasn't for Zhang Sun, he really didn't want to get involved in this mess. Whoever ruled the world had nothing to do with him. In terms of closeness, little Mingyu was much more suitable than Emperor Xia, who had always wanted to kill him. Fan Lingyue's army of 300,000 shouldn't have advanced too far. With such a big thing happening in the northern Meng imperial court, it was impossible to hide it. The hearts of the northern Meng army was the first thing that had to be resolved. After all, Great Xia had been invincible for 1,000 years. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The cities in the Central Plains were connected one after another. It wasn't that easy to attack the imperial city. The cruelest war had just begun. Once Fan Lingyue swept away all the troubles and went all out south, Great Xia would be in real danger. Whether or not they could stop Fan Lingyue before he reached the imperial city was the key to Great Xia's survival. In any dynasty, once the imperial city was breached, it wouldn't be far from destruction. This was the spiritual sustenance of the people of the dynasty. It didn't just represent a simple city. He kidnapped little Mingyu and only temporarily delayed the northern Meng army's advance to the south, giving Great Xia a chance to breathe. As for threatening Fan Lingyue to retreat, even he himself didn't believe it. The reason was simple. She was the military advisor. She was even more ruthless than Emperor Xia. The only difference was that Emperor Xia's ruthlessness had buried the north of Great Xia, while Fan Lingyue had mercilessly taken down the north of Great Xia. In this world, the difference between a smart person and a stupid person was much greater than one could imagine. Now, he had already confirmed that the Academy's teacher was the same teacher from 1,000 years ago. Therefore, the first thing he had to do was to return to the Academy. In this world, if there was anyone whose intelligence could match Fan Lingyue, it would be his teacher. The road back to the Academy was very long. Ning Chun brought little Mingyu and rushed for 2 days before they arrived. The first person he went to see wasn't his teacher, but Mr. Liu. He brought along a jar of wine that he had bought on the street. There was an imperial word on it. Old man Liu was so angry that he was fuming. This brat had said before he left that he would bring back imperial wine for him. This time he actually brought back imperial wine. He was grateful to his whole family. Ningchen didn't feel any shame. Emperor Xia was chasing him all over the world. Where could he get the real imperial wine for old man Liu? Take it or leave it. If you don't want it, I'll drink it myself, Ning Chen said impatiently. Of course I want it. Why wouldn't I? I can't let a little bastard like you benefit from it. Old Man Lu snatched the jar of wine and casually threw it to the side. It was his business whether he drank it or not, but he definitely had to leave the wine behind. This is the little emperor of Northern Meng? Old Man Lu glanced at the delicate little boy beside Ning Chen and asked curiously.
Yes.
Ning Chen patted little Mingyu's little hat and said, Call me Mr. Lu. Mr. Lu. Mingyu obediently called out. Old Man Lu nodded and said with a strange expression, Looks like you two get along well. Of course, I've always been very popular. Ning Chen laughed. All right, the wine is here. I have to go. Next time, I might bring you the real imperial wine. After saying this, Ning Chen held little Mingyu's hand and walked out of the courtyard. He had come here to tell Old Man Lu that he was safe. When his legs had just been crippled, this old man had treated him well. He couldn't be ungrateful. Old Man Lu looked at Ning Chen's back and shook his head helplessly. This kid was really not easy to deal with. After seeing Mr. Lu, Ning Chen returned to his old residence in the academy. The little white horse had grown fat and had also grown up. When the two met, there was no awkward silence, nor were there tears in their eyes. The little white horse wanted to express its longing, but was pushed away by Ning Chen. He hated horses that didn't care about hygiene the most. Little Mingyu had fallen asleep in the house. After rushing for a few days, the little girl was a little tired. After arriving at the academy, her spirit wasn't too good. Xiao Huang, you stay here with Little White. Don't fight. Do whatever you want. Ning Chen also left the little ape behind. Why was there always a monkey beside him? The little ape didn't dare to object and could only smile at the little white horse to show its friendliness. The little white horse proudly turned its head away, showing its disdain. Ning Chen didn't care how they got along. If they had the ability, he would tear down the academy. The academy had an innate stage principle. No matter how arrogant a monster was, he would be able to slap it down. The headmaster's residence wasn't far from here. He used to walk slowly and had to walk for a long time. Now he could get there in a short while. However, at the headmaster's residence, he saw a person he really didn't expect. The imperial preceptor of the Great Xia dynasty, the head of the Confucian sect, and the Grand Advisor. The Grand Advisor stood beside the headmaster with a respectful expression, following the rules of the Confucian sect and performing the etiquette of a disciple. When Ning Chen came in, neither of them were surprised, as if they already knew that he was coming. The headmaster was as old as usual, like an ordinary old man in his twilight years.
There was nothing special about him.
Headmaster, Ning Chen bowed and said respectfully. The headmaster nodded and said, How is the journey to the north? I gained a lot. Ning Chen stood up and replied. Ask whatever you want, the headmaster said slowly as he tidied up the rice paper on the table. Are you the headmasters? Ning Chen asked seriously. Yes, the headmaster nodded and said. Ning Chen was shocked. Although he was already prepared, when he heard the headmaster admit it, he still felt that it was unbelievable. How many people in the world know about this? Ning Chen asked. 4, the headmaster said calmly.
Ning Chen thought for a while.
There were 3 people present. The other person, if he guessed correctly, should be the dean of the academy. Will the Great Xia dynasty be destroyed? Ning Chen asked another question. Yes, the headmaster nodded. Ning Chen's body suddenly trembled. This was the result. But if the headmaster said that the Great Xia dynasty would be destroyed, then the Great Xia dynasty would definitely be destroyed. The people of the Confucian sect cultivated the great righteousness and were good at seeking luck and avoiding misfortune. Although the headmaster didn't practice martial arts, he was the best in the art of divination. The reason was simple. The entire Confucian sect was founded by the headmaster, and the art of divination was no exception. Is there a way to avoid it? Ning Chen asked unwillingly. Try your best, the headmaster said.
How?
Ning Chen asked for advice. Stop the war in the world. The headmaster only said 4 words. The meaning was obvious, and there was no mystery. Ning Chen still didn't quite understand. He knew that the headmaster wouldn't say useless words. Was the destruction of the great Xia dynasty not in this war? Chapter 102. The headmaster did not explain further. He had said what he needed to say. The rest was up to the younger generation. What would happen in the future was up to these young people to decide. There was not much he could do. At this moment, the Grand Advisor, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said, "Ning Chen, can the young emperor of Northern Meng be handed over to the imperial court?" Impossible. Ning Chen was stunned and immediately refused without hesitation. The Grand Advisor looked solemn and said righteously, "The young emperor of Northern Meng is of great importance. I hope you can consider it seriously. As long as you are willing to cooperate, it is not impossible for you to be made a Marquis in the future." Say no more. There is nothing to discuss. The young emperor can only be in my hands.
No one else can.
Ning Chen refused again. His attitude was unquestionable. He did not trust anyone in the imperial court, especially Emperor Xia. He had promised little Mingyu that he would not hand her over to anyone else. He had to keep his word. After Mingyu came to Great Xia, he was the only one she could rely on. If he let go, how could a 7-year-old girl live? As long as he was not dead, there was no room for discussion. The Grand Advisor frowned and said patiently, "The young emperor will not be of any use in your hands. The imperial court will be the one to negotiate. You can't make a promise and can't decide anything." Ning Chen did not speak. The Grand Advisor was telling the truth. If they wanted to negotiate with Northern Meng, only the imperial court would be the most suitable. Seeing that the young man in front of him did not speak, the Grand Advisor continued, "Listen to me. Hand over the young emperor. Only in this way can Great Xia have more time to breathe. Since you are willing to risk your life to break into the palace of Northern Meng, you must not want to see Great Xia lose this war." Ning Chen did not want to refute. He looked calmly at the leader of the Confucian sect in front of him and asked, "Grand Advisor, I know you are the leader of the Confucian sect, and you also know that the Confucian sect values morality the most. I want to ask, I have already promised the young emperor that I will not hand him over to anyone. Tell me, is Great Xia more important or the promise more important?" The Grand Advisor's expression froze. He could not answer. Reason told him that compared to a personal promise, the foundation of Great Xia was of course more important. But he was the leader of the Confucian sect. How could he persuade someone to go back on their word? The headmaster listened quietly at the side. His old face remained calm, without any ripples. After a long time, he finally made up his mind and said in a deep voice, "Follow me back to the palace to meet His Majesty. I will persuade His Majesty to confer you the title of nobility and represent the imperial court to negotiate with the Northern Meng royal court." Ning Chen furrowed his brows. It sounded plausible, but in fact it was impossible. He knew very well just how intense Emperor Xia's desire to kill him was. While Yi Futian's existence had always been a thorn in Emperor Xia's side, it might have only been because of a gunpowder incident in the beginning, but it was no longer so simple now. Yi Futian had escaped the pursuit of Emperor Xia time and time again, and Emperor Xia's anger had long since reached a boiling point. The majesty of an emperor had always been merciless and unreasonable. Ning Chen said seriously, "Great sage, do you really think this method will work? It is no secret that Emperor Xia wants to kill me. Who can guarantee that Emperor Xia will not have the intention to kill me after I return to the palace? Who can guarantee that eunuch Pei will not suddenly attack me? Although I am not afraid of death, I do not want to court death, especially when I have to face a temperamental emperor." The great sage did not deny it. What Ning Chen said was the truth. The current Emperor Xia had indeed become somewhat unrecognizable. "I cannot promise you anything, but I can promise you that if His Majesty wants to kill you, I will help you stop eunuch Pei." At this point, the great sage looked at Ning Chen and said with an incomparably solemn expression, "For the sake of the great Xia, I hope you can try it with me." Hearing this, Ning Chen furrowed his brows again. He was not surprised that the great sage said he could stop eunuch pay. As the head of the Confucian sect, he had to have some trump cards. He was just a little hesitant about whether this trip was worth it. He really did not have a good impression of Emperor Xia, and he did not believe that this tyrant, who was getting more and more perverted with age, would spare him. However, the great sage's words did cause him to waver. In the end, he still did not want to see the great Xia destroyed. I can return to the palace with you, but you must promise me that if something happens to me, you must protect the little emperor's life. Swear on the 1,000 years of reputation of the Confucian sect. Ning Chen thought for a moment, but still agreed to the great sage's suggestion. However, he also raised his own request. The great sage did not hesitate. He nodded and said, "Fine, I promise you. Since you have decided, then do it. If you have time, you can come back to the academy more often," the teacher said calmly. "Thank you for your guidance today, teacher. This junior will take his leave." Ning Chen bowed respectfully. "Teacher, this student will take his leave." The great sage took half a step back and bowed before leaving. After the two of them left, the teacher picked up his brush and slowly wrote a word on the paper. His hand trembled, but his strength penetrated the paper. When Ning Chen returned to his residence, little Mingyu was still asleep, so he sat to the side and waited. The great sage was about to speak, but he closed his mouth. He did not want to make the youth in front of him unhappy at this time. The two of them waited for more than 4 hours before little Mingyu slowly woke up. She sat up and smiled when she saw Ning Chen beside the bed. "You're awake? We should go," Ning Chen said gently as he adjusted the little girl's cloth hat. "Where are we going?" Mingyu did not understand. "The Great Xia Imperial Palace," Ning Chen said honestly. The little girl's body suddenly trembled. Her face instantly turned pale, and tears unconsciously flowed out. Ning Chen's heart ached. He gently pulled little Mingyu into his arms and comforted her. "It's okay. I'm just negotiating with Emperor Xia. It has nothing to do with you." Mingyu raised her tear-stained head and asked, "Really? Really?" Ning Chen nodded seriously. "All right, since he's awake, we should be on our way," the great sage said from the side. Only then did little Mingyu notice that there was a stranger in the room. She quickly got up from Ning Chen's arms and wiped away her tears. She did not want others to see her weak side. She was the emperor of Northern Meng and represented the entire Northern Meng court. She could not show any weakness in front of the people of Great Xia. Of course, bad people were an exception. "Do you want to walk on your own or piggyback?" Ning Chen asked softly. "I'll walk on my own," Mingyu replied. Little Mingyu reached out and grabbed his big hand. She did not even look at the great sage and walked out of the room. Ning Chen sighed. When little Mingyu was not familiar with him, she was also so proud and stubborn. Now that he thought about it, it was just a way for the little girl to protect herself. She was already an emperor before she could even remember anything. Moreover, she had to hide her identity as a girl. It was destined that little Mingyu could not show any weakness at all. In this world, the easiest thing to be an emperor was also the hardest thing to be. The academy was not far from the imperial city. If they took a carriage, they could reach it in a little more than a day. The great sage was in a hurry, but Ning Chen was not in a hurry. Because little Mingyu was still a little scared, it took them 2 days to arrive. After arriving at the imperial city, Ning Chen brought little Mingyu out of the carriage. He did not choose to enter the palace immediately. Instead, he promised the great sage that he would personally bring little Mingyu there the next morning. Seeing that the former had made up his mind, the great sage had no choice but to nod and agree. He then left in the carriage. Ning Chen randomly found an inn in the city. After paying for the room, he went upstairs directly. In the room, Ning Chen had little Mingyu sit on the bed. Then, he injected a little bit of vital energy from the life scroll into the little girl's body. There was a Khanate master in the palace. He could not be careless. The secret that little Mingyu was a girl could not be known by others. The vital energy could temporarily disturb her pulse. As long as eunuch Pei did not touch little Mingyu's body, he should not be able to tell. Mingyu, have a good rest. You may have to fight tomorrow. But I'm here. Don't be afraid, Ningchen said softly as he rubbed the little girl's hair. Okay. Mingyu nodded and lay down obediently. Night fell. Ningchen sat in the room and seized the time to cultivate. In his Dantian Sea of Qi, beside the two cyclones, a third aura gradually gathered. The blue light rolled like waves. Spiritual Qi rolled and quickly formed a very small cyclone in his Dantian Sea of Qi. In the next moment, Ningchen forced the vital energy he had suppressed that day into the cyclone, quickly filling up the weak third cyclone. Of the 10 years of cultivation the old Marquis had given him, more than half had been consumed when he had broken through. He did not dare to continue devouring the remaining half because he was worried that his foundation would be unstable and affect his future cultivation. Now, it was the perfect time to use it to cultivate the Zhongsun branches techniques. His talent could not be considered good. After cultivating for so many days, he could only be considered to have made some progress. In the end, the Zhongsun branches techniques needed to be combined with the Zhongsun branches techniques. There was no telling what would happen tomorrow. The Grand Xia's imperial palace was filled with experts, and there was not just one Khanate master.
It was always good to be prepared.
The spiritual qi fluctuations in the room grew stronger and stronger. The third cyclone was also constantly devouring vital energy. It was only when it was about the same size as the other two cyclones did it stop. However, this kind of cyclone that had not experienced any bottlenecks had an extremely unstable foundation. Once it started fighting, it would quickly consume its vital energy, and its recovery speed would be much slower. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. How much effort you put in would be how much you received in return. In the end, his greatest reliance was still the life scroll. It was also the foundation of his cultivation. In the northern Meng camp, an urgent letter appeared in the commander's tent. After reading it, Fan Lingyue's eyes narrowed slightly. He had finally returned to the Grand Xia's imperial city. Men, Fan Lingyue said. Present. A heavily armored general walked in. It was the leader of the heavily armored cavalry, Qing Wuyo. Ever since Yang Hong had stayed in Heaven's Gate, the task of protecting the military advisor had fallen on him. Tell Qing Wuhan that her chance is coming soon. Remember, there is only one chance. She must not fail. Fan Lingyue said solemnly. Yes. Qing Wuyo respectfully accepted the order and immediately turned to leave. Cough, cough. After Qing Wuyo left, Fan Lingyue covered his mouth and coughed violently a few times. When it landed, a bright red color appeared in his palm, so dazzling. Chapter 103. At dawn the next day, Ningchen held Mingyu's hand and walked towards the Xia palace. The little girl's hat covered her long hair. From afar, she looked silly, charming, and cute. The morning sun was so bright that it shone on the ground and dyed it a faint golden color. The imperial guards of the palace lined up from the south gate to the front of the heavenly mandate hall. Their armor clanged, and every one of them exuded an intimidating aura. They were the most elite soldiers of the Xia dynasty. Mingyu was a little nervous. Her little hand held the big hand beside her tightly, unwilling to let go for even a moment. The palace of the Xia dynasty had been invincible for thousands of years. With every step they took, they could feel the unparalleled pressure. This was something that no era or dynasty could compare to. Ningchen and Mingyu walked between the two rows of imperial guards. Step by step, their bodies were straight, and they never lowered their heads. One was a descendant of Wuxia, and the other was the emperor of northern Meng. Life could be lost, but dignity was priceless. In the heavenly mandate hall, Emperor Xia sat on the dragon throne. Zhongsun sat beside him, and the three dukes stood quietly below. The 5 most powerful people of the Xia dynasty were all gathered, waiting quietly for the 2 who had come. Ningchen came, holding Mingyu's hand. He walked slowly from afar, and the moment he stepped into the hall, the atmosphere froze. Worry flashed in Zongxuan's eyes. She should not have come today. The imperial harem should not interfere in politics. This was the rule of the ancestors. But she was really worried. Emperor Xia's attitude was the biggest variable today. No one could predict what would happen. Ning Chen looked at Zhang Sun and smiled gently. He was still a little shy as usual. Zhang Sun shook her head without leaving a trace, indicating that he should be careful and not be rash. At this moment, Emperor Xia said calmly from the dragon throne, Ning Chen, hand over the Emperor of Northern Meng and the secret recipe of that thing, and I will let bygones be bygones. Impossible. Ning Chen refused directly. Then there is nothing to talk about, Emperor Xia said calmly. Men, arrest this traitor. Yes. As soon as he said this, 2 captains of the Shadow Dragon Guards appeared. There was also a huge commotion outside. Imperial guards rushed in groups and blocked the way out of the Heavenly Mandate Hall. They blocked all escape routes. Everyone's expression changed, especially Zhang Sun. She gripped her chair tightly, and there was anger in her eyes. How is this a negotiation? In the main hall, Ning Chen's eyes gradually turned cold. The real qi around his body rose, and the temperature in the main hall dropped instantly. There was no wind, and snow was falling. It was as if winter had come again. The 2 dark dragon guards also had grave expressions. They knew that the youth in front of them was not so easy to deal with. The 2 of them stood on opposite sides, secretly raising their martial arts, ready to attack. The situation was very unfavorable for Ning Chen. It was not because the 2 people in front of him were of the 9th rank, nor was it because there were imperial guards outside the hall. It was because he did not have a sword. Other than Prince Yan, no one else in the world could bring a sword to meet Emperor Xia. After a moment of confrontation, the 2 hidden dragon guards attacked at the same time. Relying on their 9th grade cultivation, their palm force pressed over. In the first palm strike, 2 powerful forces moved together. Their aura swallowed the mountains and rivers, and heaven and earth lost their color. Ning Chen took a step back. His spirit shivered as he circulated the life scroll to its peak. Frost surged around his body as he flipped his left and right hands. He was fighting 1 against 2. Ta! In the raging wind, there was an almost undetectable sound of blood falling. Looking over, blood slowly flowed from the corners of the 3 people's mouths. After a palm strike, they were all injured. On the dragon throne, Emperor Xia narrowed his eyes slightly. Letting the tiger return to the mountain would eventually become a big problem. The little eunuch who did not know martial arts in the past was now able to fight 2 9th grade hidden dragon guards. The situation was not good. Ning Chen did not want to delay any longer. He moved his palm, and the silver light faded. Blue waves rose up, and the vigorous real qi turned into huge waves. It was the secret of the Zhangsun family. The waves of the world flow to the east. The awe-inspiring might of God's descent turned the entire Heavenly Mandate Palace blue. The huge waves pressed down like an ocean overturning. The 2 hidden dragon guards did not dare to be careless. They used their ultimate moves at the same time. Blue and white light shone brightly, and they met the shocking moves head-on. The ultimate moves collided. With a boom, the Heavenly Mandate Palace was hit. Large pieces of stone flew up and hit the surrounding pillars, shattering all over the sky. The 3 dukes attacked together, blocking the remaining power in front of the Empress. Their expressions were very serious. In the aftermath, the 2 hidden dragon guards took a few steps back. Then they groaned and vomited. The hidden dragon guards were actually defeated by this palm. Ning Chen took a step back. With a wave of his hand, he blocked all the broken stones in front of little Mingyu. A bloody taste rose up in his throat, but he forced it down. Not bad. Just at this moment, a hoarse voice sounded out. Then, an emaciated and thin figure walked out slowly. His face was old and haggard, but it caused everyone present to feel an irresistible pressure. Old Eunuch Pei. He was the true strongest in the imperial palace. The next moment, the old figure disappeared. The withered hand reached for Ning Chen. There was no technique, but there was still no way to avoid it. At this critical moment, the Grand Advisor, who was already prepared, flashed between the two. The noble chi around him surged, and his palm met old eunuch Pei's. With a boom, the two of them took half a step back. It was a draw. Grand Advisor, what do you mean by this? Old eunuch Pei frowned and asked slowly. I promised him that if you attacked, I would be responsible for stopping you, the Grand Advisor replied calmly. Eunuch Pei's frown deepened. The Grand Advisor's status was special. Ordinary officials could not compare to him. It was indeed troublesome. Teacher, is this your decision? Seated on the dragon throne, the Xia Emperor spoke calmly. The Grand Advisor looked up at the Xia Emperor, sighed softly, and said, Your Majesty, this old subject will say the same thing again. The Grand Xia needs peace, and at this time, Ning Chen is the person most likely to bring about peace. Emperor Xia did not answer. Instead, he turned his head and asked, Empress, what do you think? What Grand Advisor says is my opinion, Zhang Sun replied with a grave expression. He, very good. Emperor Xia laughed coldly. He then stood up and walked down from the high platform. He came before Mingyu, who was standing beside Ning Chen. Ning Chen has performed a meritorious service by bringing back the Northern Meng Emperor. He will be conferred the title of Jiming Marquis and be granted a residence in the imperial city. The sudden change made the three directors and Zhang Xuan's expressions turn cold. For a moment, they thought they had misheard. Ning Chen's eyelids twitched violently. He felt uneasy. He felt that things were not so simple. However, the imperial edict was quickly passed down. The matter was settled, and he had to believe it even if he did not want to. Emperor Xia left after giving the imperial edict. Zhang Sun could only leave with him. Before leaving, her eyes were filled with confusion and worry. When she looked at him, she signaled for him to be careful. Ning Chen nodded. After thinking for a while, he left the palace with Mingyu. In the Grand Advisor's residence, the Grand Advisor stood in front of the desk with a grave expression. He was wondering if something had gone wrong. Emperor Xia's change was too sudden. A moment ago, he had given the order to kill, and now, he had changed his mind and made him a marquis. Xia Zi arrived with an aura of righteousness. Step by step, his steps were slow and forceful. His clothes were as white as snow, and he wore a gilded crown. His hair was as black as ink, and his face was cold and stern. His back was straight, and his figure was like a divine tree that contained an unfathomable tenacity. The person who had come was none other than the first prince, who was most likely to inherit the throne. Teacher, Chu Zi bowed respectfully. He had been taught by the Grand Advisor since he was young, and he deserved to be called teacher. The Grand Advisor nodded. He was not surprised by Xia Zi's arrival. Zi, can you tell what His Majesty is up to? Xia Zi shook his head slightly and said, I can't tell for now. Father's temperament has changed greatly, and he does things differently. Other than eunuch Pei, I'm afraid no one else in the world knows what father is up to. Doubt, 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 doubt. The Grand Advisor sighed and wrote 4 words on a piece of paper. He looked at the heavenly mandate hall in the palace with a puzzled expression. What was the Emperor of Xia thinking? In Weiyang Palace, Zhang Sun was also frowning. He had been thinking for a whole day, but he still could not figure out Emperor Xia's intentions. Qingning stood quietly to the side. She already knew what had happened in the heavenly mandate hall. She should have been happy that Ning Chen had been made a marquis, but all signs indicated that things were not so simple. If Emperor Xia could let go of his killing intent so easily, Xia Kingdom would not have fallen to its current state. Emperor Xia was no longer the original Emperor Xia. Ever since the war between the 2 dynasties began, Emperor Xia had changed so much that no one could recognize him. Today's situation undoubtedly showed that Emperor Xia still had a strong desire to kill Ning Chen. But why did he suddenly change in the end? She still could not figure it out. The matter of Ning Chen being made a marquis was, without a doubt, a foregone conclusion. The next day, a eunuch came to the inn and led the 2 of them to the residence that Emperor Xia had bestowed upon them. Xia Kingdom had been established for thousands of years, and there were countless nobles. The titles of Marquis were also innumerable. Other than the title of Marquis, ordinary Marquis was nothing. The residence was not small, and there were maids and servants. After a careful inspection, they could not find anything unusual. There were at least thousands of such residences in the imperial city. It was not unusual. The uneasiness in Ning Chen's heart did not dissipate. He did not believe that Emperor Xia would let him go so easily. There must be something wrong. The eunuch returned to the palace to report the edict. The Marquis residence was busy but calm. Everything was so normal that it made people uncomfortable. The uneasiness in Ning Chen's heart grew more and more serious. After that, he did not let little Mingyu leave his side for even a moment. Even if the little girl ate, slept, or went to the outhouse, he did not leave her side. Mingyu could tell that Ning Chen's mood was not right. She obediently followed beside him, moving as little as possible. Night fell, and the sky gradually darkened. Emperor Xia slowly walked to the Heavenly Mandate Palace in the imperial city. This was the highest place in the imperial city, and one could see everything in the imperial city. "Old dog Pei, do you think he will like the gift I gave him?" Emperor Xia said with a cold smile. "If you want him to like it, he must like it, Your Majesty." Eunuch Pei walked out and said in a hoarse voice, "I am the Emperor of Xia Kingdom. Anyone who dares to go against my will must die." As he spoke, the smile on Emperor Xia's face grew colder and colder. It carried a trace of madness, and people could not help but feel cold. Chapter 104. It was late at night, but there were still many people who were not asleep. The Grand Advisor, the eldest grandson, Qing Ning, and the first prince were all looking in the direction of the manor of the Marquis of Jiming with worry in their eyes. An uneasy atmosphere was spreading in and out of the palace. No one knew what would happen tonight. Manor of the Marquis of Jiming. Red words were engraved on the plaque in front of the manor. Under the moonlight, they emitted a dazzling blood-red color. Ning Chen sat in his room within the manor, his brows furrowed in worry. He still couldn't figure out what Emperor Xia was planning. The night was getting darker, and the lights in the manor were gradually extinguished. Suddenly, light footsteps came from outside the door. It was a little hurried, as if something was going to happen. Ning Chen walked forward and opened the door. He saw a girl dressed as a maid holding a candle and hurrying east. He could not help but frown. It was already so late. Where was she going? Little Mingyue was still in the room, and Ning Chen did not dare to leave. After closing the door, he thought for a while and did not take it to heart. There was no fluctuation of vital energy on this maid, and she was not a threat to him. Not everyone could hide their martial cultivation like Fan Lingyue. It was enough that there was one Fan Lingyue in the world. It was impossible for there to be a second one. Little Mingyue lay on the bed, tossing and turning. After a while, she sat up and said sadly, "The candle is too bright. I can't sleep." Ning Chen was startled. He was so busy thinking that he had forgotten about this. Ning Chen got up to blow out the candle. At this moment, his body trembled and his expression changed. Candle, oh no. He was too careless. The moon was so bright outside. Why did the maid have to hold a candle? Wasn't it unnecessary? In this world, he was all too familiar with things that needed to use fire. After a moment of thought, Ning Chen's figure flashed. He picked up little Mingyue and rushed out of the manor, without saying a word. However, he was still half a step too slow. The next moment, an earth-shattering explosion sounded. It was as if thunder from the ninth heaven had struck the world. The loud explosion instantly woke everyone in the imperial city. Qing Ning and the Grand Advisor, who had been paying attention, suddenly changed their expressions. How could it be? In front of the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Emperor Xia looked at the sudden explosion in the imperial city and laughed crazily. "Old dog Pei, what do you think of my gift?" Emperor Xia laughed wildly and crazily. Although those useless people of the Celestial Workshop were unable to find the formula, they still found the way to explode. So, what if they were not powerful enough? He had plenty of manpower and money. He had already ordered the entire Jiming Marquis residence to be buried full of medicinal stones. He had been waiting for this moment. Amidst the flames, Ning Chen, who was holding little Mingyu, was sent flying 10 feet away by the aftershock. As soon as he landed on the ground, he suddenly vomited a mouthful of blood. "Xia Rui, you old man." Seeing that the mansion behind him, along with hundreds of servants, was instantly engulfed in the sea of fire, a vicious glint flashed in Ning Chen's eyes as he shouted furiously in the direction of the palace. At the same time, outside the firelight, 3 strong breaths appeared. Each of them was at the later stage of level 9, or the peak of level 9. They were the 3 commanders of the Hidden Dragon Guards. In front of the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Emperor Xia's laughter gradually stopped, and he said calmly, "Old Dog Pei, go and take a look. If they don't live up to your expectations, you can do it yourself."
Yes.
Old Eunuch Pei bowed respectfully, then turned into a streak of light and shot towards the sea of fire in the imperial city. In the Duke of Grand Wisdom's manor, the Duke of Grand Wisdom's feet moved. Just as he was about to move, he was blocked by Duke Xiu. "Duke Xiu, you." The Duke of Grand Wisdom's expression was slightly angry as he shouted, "Emperor Xia has ordered me to keep you here. My good friend, I apologize for the offense." Duke Xiu retracted her feather fan and sent out a palm strike towards the Duke of Grand Wisdom. The Duke of Grand Wisdom had no choice but to use his own moves to deal with it. The righteous Qi of the Confucian school was a match of supreme arts, and it was difficult to determine who would emerge victorious. To the side, Duke Jingwu had also arrived. He sighed softly and did not help either side. In front of Weiyang Palace, the Imperial Guard quickly surrounded it. Several of the Imperial Guard leaders stood guard at the entrance, blocking Qing Ning's path. Zhang Xuan's expression was extremely ugly, and the flames of anger in his heart rose. Had Emperor Xia gone mad? In the Marquis Jiming's manor, Ning Qin carried little Mingyu on his back in front of the raging flames. Soon after, with a ripping sound, he tore open his clothes and tied the little girl to his body in circles. Today, whether dead or alive, little Mingyu could not leave him even half a step. "Are you afraid?" Ning Qin turned his head and asked softly. "No." Mingyu shook her head and replied, "All right, then let's kill our way out together today." Ning Qin pulled out the ink sword on his back and held it in his right hand, then walked forward step by step. The 3 commanders of the Hidden Dragon Guard surrounded him. Their expressions were cold, and the killing intent in their eyes was not concealed at all. Having already been injured in the previous explosion, Ning Qin knew that dragging the battle out would be disadvantageous for him. Thus, he moved his ink sword and attacked first. A sword light flashed past, sweeping towards one of the commanders. A peak 8th rank martial artist against a late 9th rank martial artist. This was a battle of a whole level and 1 against 3. The result was almost obvious. With a bang, the sword and halberd collided, causing dust to fill the air. The stone floor beneath their feet cracked, and the yellow soil spread everywhere, obscuring their line of sight. Ning Chen's slightly inferior move changed again because of the arrival of a saber and a sword behind him. Ning Chen's body flashed and moved 30 feet away, barely avoiding the combined power of the saber and the sword. The 3 commanders of the Hidden Dragon Guard surrounded him again, their auras becoming more and more majestic. One was a peak 9th rank martial artist, and 2 were late 9th rank martial artists. Their strength was unquestionable. Ning Chen's expression was solemn. Even if he was at his peak, he could at most deal with one of these experts. Now that he was seriously injured, there was almost no chance of winning. However, after one move, he had basically tested the strength of the 3. The one holding the halberd was undoubtedly a peak 9th rank martial artist. The other 2 were slightly weaker, but they were late 9th rank martial artists. What was there to fight in such a battle? That old man Xia Rui, in order to kill him, had probably sent out the 3 strongest members of the Hidden Dragon Guard. Ning Chen understood that he could not continue fighting. Now, the most important thing was to kill his way out of the encirclement. Thinking of this, Ning Chun sheathed the black sword in his hand. With a flip of his palm, the Deathbreaker bow flew out. The bow bent like a crescent moon, and 3 arrows were shot in succession, all aimed at the commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard. The 3 arrow lights chased after the stars and the moon, each brighter and scarier than the last. The commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard's expression was solemn. He did not dare to be careless. He raised his halberd, and with a swing of the halberd, the sky was cut. There was a loud explosion. Even someone as strong as the commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard could not withstand the terrifying aftershock and retreated 10 steps. At this moment, the black sword and Frost had already arrived in front of the other commander holding the sword. The graceful sword had thousands of changes, condensing into one. It was so fast that it was unbelievable. The second commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard's expression changed. He held his sword horizontally to block the attack, but he could not block it. The sword entered his body, and he retreated a few steps.
Ugh.
Blood spurted out from the penetrated shoulder. The second commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard endured the pain, and with a flip of his palm, he pressed towards Ning Chen's chest. At the same time, the third commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard's blade light also arrived in front of him. Ning Chen took the palm head-on and retreated 3 steps. He took the opportunity to pull out the black sword, and with a flip of his left palm, a dark yellow light flourished. Thick earth chi exploded, and the third commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard's body became unstable, and a flaw appeared in his move. Waves of the World East. The moment he changed his move, blue waves surged around Ning Chen, and he pressed his palm towards the third commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard. With a bang, the third commander blocked with his blade, and his body retreated a few feet, but he was not seriously injured. Ning Chen's sudden change of move was not enough, and did not pose much of a threat. However, this was enough. Finally, there was only one commander left in front of him. Ning Chen moved his sword, and used his final move. Raging waves roared out from the 9 heavens, and with a slash of his sword, the sword split open the raging sea. First defense, raging waves splitting 10,000 leagues. A world-shaking might roared out, and the third cyclone in Ning Chen's body instantly dried up, and he fell into a deathly stillness. The second commander of the Hidden Dragon Guard flew out with a bang, and blood sprayed out, dyeing half the sky red. Ning Chen's feet moved, and he was about to take this opportunity to rush out of the encirclement. However, at this moment, a withered hand appeared in the distance, quickly approaching, and in the blink of an eye, sealed off his escape route. Ning Chen hurriedly retreated, and was once again in a difficult situation. This old eunuch had actually come as well. Where was the Grand Advisor? Why did he not come as promised? Ning Chen's heart sank. This battle boded ill, and he was far from being able to fight with an innate stage master. Old eunuch Pei did not say anything, and with a flash of his body, he attacked again. Ning Chen's pupils constricted, and he was about to raise his genuine qi again, when suddenly, a sense of weakness came over him, and he staggered. Imperial Palace, Heavenly Mandate Palace. Emperor Xia stood quietly in front of the palace, looking at the scenery in the firelight, and smiled proudly, with a hint of madness. However, a scene that no one expected happened. In front of Emperor Xia's chest, a ray of sword light shot out silently, without any warning. Emperor Xia turned his head with difficulty, and the shock in his eyes could not be concealed. West Palace, it's you. Your Majesty, you were careless. Imperial concubine Wan, or should she be called Qing Wuhan, said softly. As she spoke, the sword in her hand cut another 3 inches, and a large amount of blood splattered. I didn't expect it to really be you. Before he finished speaking, Emperor Xia coughed violently, and blood spilled from his mouth. He had been careless. He had suspected the West Palace, and had even thought that Wan Yunshang was the mastermind behind the internal strife of the Great Xia. However, after Prince Yu was killed, he had temporarily suppressed this thought. He did not expect that the one who betrayed him in the end would be someone close to him. "Have you practiced martial arts?" Emperor Xia asked, coughing up blood. "I've been crippled, or else how could I have come to your side?" Qing Wuhan's beautiful face flashed with a trace of emotion. She had waited for this day for nearly 10 years. Haha, ridiculous, ridiculous. Emperor Xia suddenly turned around and pressed his palm against Qing Wuhan's chest. With a bang, blood spurted out, and the most beautiful woman in the world flew out like cotton in the rain. Her last shocked look faded as her scattered hair gradually faded. Attacks on the heart were calculated, and in the end, who would open their heart to the other party? Emperor Xia did not even look at the West Palace again. He staggered with each step, coughing up blood with each step. He dragged his dying body slowly and stubbornly toward the dragon throne in the heavenly Mandate Palace. The high and lofty steps, the majesty of the past, had become difficult today. Emperor Xia clutched at his bleeding chest, and with each step he took, he had to rest for a moment. After a long time, the stubborn figure finally sat on the dragon throne. The next moment, crazy laughter rang throughout the heavenly Mandate Palace, and it did not stop for a long time. He was Emperor Xia, the unmistakable emperor of the Great Xia. Chapter 105. Emperor Xia was dead. He died on the dragon throne. The smile on his face was still maniacal. He had no regrets even in death. The empty heavenly Mandate Palace was cold and silent. No one came in. Outside the palace, Qing Wuhan lay there quietly. Her palace dress was stained with blood. Under the moonlight, she looked like a blooming rose. Two people who schemed against each other ended up being each other's last companions. How ironic and sad was that? Emperor Xia was skilled in martial arts. In the palace of Great Xia, there was a treasure that could hide the secrets of heaven. It hid the vision of old eunuch Pei when he broke through to the Khanate level. It also hid the fact that Emperor Xia was participating in the martial arts competition. However, Emperor Xia's martial arts cultivation was not strong. Long years of hard work had already exhausted his body. Instead of improving, his martial arts had regressed. Xia Rui was undoubtedly the most diligent emperor of Great Xia in the past 1,000 years. Because of his paranoia and suspicion, he had to make decisions himself no matter how big or small the matter was. He would never hand it over to others. In his later years, Xia Rui was pitiful. The pressure of not wanting to be the most incompetent emperor of Great Xia, coupled with his increasing suspicion, finally made this conservative emperor a tyrant. In the 1,000 years of history of Great Xia, there had never been a tyrant. It only stopped when Xia Rui was born. It was both fortunate and unfortunate. Xia Rui never lacked powerful people by his side. Other than old eunuch Pei, there were also 3 commanders of the Shadow Dragon Guards. They were enough to deal with any assassination in the world. Unfortunately, the 4 strongest people were not by his side today. Qing Wuhan was from the West Palace. Therefore, other than these 4 direct descendants of Emperor Xia, no one dared to stop her. Who would have thought that consort one of Great Xia was a spy planted by the military advisor of Beimeng? Qing Wuhan's only mistake was that she had miscalculated the possibility of Emperor Xia participating in the martial arts competition. A momentary mistake caused her to die. As for whether Fan Lingyue had predicted this, no one in the world knew. A breeze blew, bringing with it a slight chill. It made the lonely heavenly Mandate Palace even colder. In the spring of the 2nd year of Great Xia, Emperor Xia collapsed. In the imperial city, the battle was still going on. Blazing flames soared into the sky. A withered hand covered the sky. Ning Chen, who was already exhausted, had no way out. Life and death was in an instant. Little Ming Yu closed her eyes in despair, unwilling to watch. However, at this moment, 2 streams of light, one green and one red, appeared in the sky and arrived in the blink of an eye. With a schwa sound, the 2 swords flew towards eunuch Pei's hands, blocking this deadly palm strike. On the other side, the first prince had also arrived. His overwhelming aura shook off the halberd, and he brought Ning Chen out of the battlefield. Ning Chen's body staggered once again before he could step out. His chest felt heavy, and he immediately vomited a mouthful of blood. Due to the excessive consumption of his Xinqi, the injuries in his body could no longer be suppressed. Finally, they exploded at this moment. The sudden change startled old eunuch Pei and the 3 Dark Dragon Guard commanders. Just as they were about to attack again, old eunuch Pei's expression suddenly changed. "Your Majesty!" Old eunuch Pei stamped his feet and turned into a stream of light as he rushed back. He could clearly feel that something had happened to His Majesty. The 3 commanders of the Dark Dragon Guards did not know the reason. They looked at each other with surprise and confusion in their eyes. "This battle is over. Everyone go back." Amidst the calm words, a green figure slowly walked over. The green and red swords stuck in the ground trembled as they flew towards the newcomer. Prince Yan. The 3 commanders of the Dark Dragon Guards squinted their eyes as they became fearful. Back when Prince Yan fought his way out of the palace, they had exchanged blows with him. They knew how powerful this legend of the Great Xia dynasty was. They even suspected that the legend of the Great Xia dynasty might have already stepped into the Xiantian realm. "Retreat." The commander of the Dark Dragon Guards made a prompt decision and said in a low voice. There was no chance of winning this battle. With Prince Yan around, they could no longer complete their mission. The other 2 commanders nodded. Their figures flashed, and they quickly disappeared from the battlefield. After the 3 of them left, Xia Zi looked at the person in front of him and bowed respectfully. "Third uncle."
Yes.
Prince Yan nodded in response. He then walked to Ning Chen and gathered his Xinqi into his palm to help him suppress his injuries. Ning Chen calmed his mind and closed his eyes. He activated the life scroll and used Prince Yan's Xinqi to slowly suppress the surging blood in his body. "Third uncle, teacher is still waiting for my news. Z will take his leave first." Seeing that Ning Chen's life was not in danger, Xia Zi cupped his hands and said goodbye. He then turned and left. Ning Chen slowly opened his eyes and looked at the departing Xia Zi. He felt complicated. This was the first time he had seen the Crown Prince, but he could not help but sigh. The difference between the current Emperor Xia and the Crown Prince was too great. The Emperor Xia's ruthlessness and gloominess and the Crown Prince's benevolence and righteousness were 2 polar opposites. "Z is not bad, but he's not suitable to be an emperor," Prince Yan said indifferently. Ning Chen did not refute. What the senior said was true. As an emperor, he could not lack either benevolence or ruthlessness. The Crown Prince was indeed not suitable. Of course, the Emperor Xia was even more unsuitable. "Let's go. Follow me back to the residence first." Prince Yan waved his hand, and a sword rack appeared in front of Ning Chen. Ning Chen did not say anything else. He carried the sword rack on his back and looked at it. Little Mingyue lay on Ning Chen's back and curiously pulled at the swords on the rack, but she could not pull any of them out. "Mingyue, don't be naughty," Ning Chen said softly. The little girl withdrew her hand and smiled embarrassedly. "Senior, please keep this a secret," Ning Chen said with a hint of pleading. "Okay." Prince Yan did not turn his head. Little Mingyue was confused. She did not understand what the 2 of them were talking about. Ning Chen rubbed the little girl's cloth hat and did not explain. When little Mingyue touched the sword on the rack, the fact that she was a girl was no longer a secret. In the world, only Prince Yan could sense the sword's aura. Back then, it was because he had touched the azure sword that his secret of being a fake eunuch was exposed. Fortunately, Prince Yan's temperament was indifferent, and he did not take this matter to heart. They quickly arrived at Prince Yan's residence. A beautiful maid brought little Mingyue back to her room to rest. Ning Chen followed Prince Yan to the study. "Senior, was the commotion outside northern Meng City caused by your battle with that sword in Sword City?" Ning Chen hesitated for a moment before asking the question that had been in his heart for a long time. "Yes," Prince Yan nodded. "Did you obtain that sand sword?" Ning Chen continued to ask. Prince Yan's hand moved slightly. Fine sand flew out of the rack and condensed into a light yellow sword. Ning Chen's pupils constricted. What a strange sword. There really were all kinds of strange things in the world. Did that sword in Sword City lose? Ning Chen's eyes flashed. Sword City's sword was an invincible legend in the hearts of all swordsmen. It was hard to imagine that it would lose. He did not lose, but I won. Prince Yen waved his hand. The sand sword scattered and returned to the rack. Ning Chen was startled. He did not understand. I got there before him, so the sword must be mine. In other words, if he got there first, the sword was his, explained Prince Yen calmly. Ning Chen did not understand. His cultivation level was still very low. He could not imagine what had happened that day. At this moment, hurried footsteps came from outside the door. An anxious voice rang out. Prince, news has come from the palace. His Majesty was attacked by an assassin and died.
How?
The sudden news caused Ning Chen's heart to tremble violently. For a moment, he couldn't believe it. Let's go. Follow me to the palace, said Prince Yen. He quickly reacted. What about Mingyue? Ning Chen asked worriedly. Don't worry. There are housekeepers in the residence. As long as they are not Xiantian, no one can hurt her, replied Prince Yen. Ning Chen nodded. He carried the rack and followed Prince Yen out of the residence. At the same time, in the imperial city, those who stood at the top of the Xia dynasty all received the news of Emperor Xia's death. They were shocked and immediately chose to enter the palace. This was an earth-shattering event. Emperor Xia's death was too sudden. The Xia dynasty might once again be plunged into a bloodbath. Outside the Heavenly Mandate Palace, the 3 chancellors, the 9 ministers, and the feudal lords of the imperial city had all arrived. However, at this moment, there were only 3 people who attracted the most attention. The first Prince Xia Zi, the third Prince Xia Yanwu, and the 10th Prince Xia Mingri. They were the princes of the Xia dynasty most likely to become the new emperor. They would also decide the future direction of the Xia dynasty. The fact that Emperor Xia had not chosen a successor was the biggest hidden danger. Now that Emperor Xia was dead, the throne of the Xia dynasty was also uncertain. In the distance, Prince Yen walked over step by step. Behind him was Ning Chen, who was carrying a sword on his back. They immediately attracted everyone's attention. They had all heard the big explosion tonight clearly. They were very curious about the main character of the night before. It had to be said that this newly appointed Marquis Jiming was very lucky. This was the first time that Emperor Xia had failed to kill someone. Greetings, Prince Yen. All the officials bowed. Although the legend of the Xia dynasty did not care about politics, it did not stop him from having the highest title. No one dared to miss this bow. Rise, said Prince Yen indifferently. Thank you, Prince Yen. All the officials stood up. Third brother, long time no see. At the same time, Prince Hua stepped forward and bowed. 7 years. Prince Yan's eyes flashed with a touch of sadness. 7 years was not a long time, but it was also not a short time. His fourth brother was gradually showing signs of age. Time was merciless. It made people grow old in the blink of an eye. Big brother, looking at the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Prince Hua sighed again. Although he had been put under house arrest by Emperor Xia in the imperial city for more than 10 years, he was still alive compared to his other brothers. After a person died, all grievances would vanish like smoke. All that was left was regret. The hatred of the past had faded after more than 10 years of house arrest. He was tired of hating and had come to terms with it. In life, one could not live with hatred in their hearts. Now that Emperor Xia was dead, only the 3 of them were left of more than 10 brothers. Let's go to the palace and send him off for the last time. With that, Prince Yen walked toward the Heavenly Mandate Palace. Behind him, all the officials followed the 2 princes into the palace. After entering, they all knelt down respectfully. Not long after, Prince Zhongsun walked in wearing a crown of dragon and phoenix pearls. He wore a robe with golden dragon and phoenix patterns. Looking at Emperor Xia on the dragon throne, he sighed deeply. It was difficult to say whether he was happy or sad. They had been together for more than 10 years. Today, they were going to send each other off in luxurious clothes. On the dragon throne, Emperor Xia's eyes were wide open. He was laughing with a hint of madness. He had no regrets in this life. Chapter 106. Within 2 days, the news of Emperor Xia's death had spread throughout the world. Everyone was shocked speechless. This time, Emperor Xia was truly dead. Moreover, behind this shocking news, there was an equally frightening truth. Emperor Xia had died in an assassination attempt. The assassin was Consort, one of the Western Palace. Wang Yinshang had been in the palace for 9 years. No one expected her to act only now. Very few people knew that the Western Palace's consort one was Qing Wuhan of the Qing clan. And those who knew would never say it out loud. The war between the two dynasties had gone through too many twists and turns, ups and downs. Today, neither dynasty had an emperor. It had to be said that it was a kind of irony. It was hard to say who was the happiest about Emperor Xia's death, but there were definitely people who were happy. Little Mingyu was one of them. Ningchen needed to recuperate, so he stayed in Prince Yan's residence for the time being. Little Mingyu naturally stayed as well. Although the little girl was a captive, hostage in name, she was no different from an ancestor. She had a butler to protect her, so there was no need to worry about her safety. Ningchen didn't restrict her freedom either. She could do whatever she wanted. Emperor Xia was dead, and eunuch Pei was in seclusion. No one in the imperial city would cause trouble for him and little Mingyu for the time being. Now, everyone was paying attention to which prince would inherit the throne. The powerful officials in the court were also quickly choosing sides. It would probably take a while before anyone had time to care about them. Zhang Sun was probably having a headache. Emperor Xia's funeral and the appointment of the crown prince required her attention. But he couldn't help with these matters, so he was happy to be idle. As for the Western Palace's identity, he had a vague guess but couldn't be sure. But he was sure that Wang Yunshang was related to the Beimeng court. A few months ago, when he received the letter of Beiwu Marquis' betrayal, the Western Palace had sent people to kill him. But there was no point in worrying about Wang Yunshang's identity now. Emperor Xia's death was a fact. At this juncture, no one would admit it. There were too many mysteries in history. This one didn't make much of a difference. Prince Yan was rarely in the manor these days. He had probably been dragged away by Zhang Sun. Zhang Sun was the best coolie in the world. If not for the fact that he could not help much, he probably would not have been able to escape. It could be said that the 2 days after Emperor Xia's death were the most leisurely days he had had since he came to this world. He didn't need to work, fight, or take care of his child. Bad guy, I'm back. At this moment, little Mingyu ran back happily in her cloth hat. The butler behind her had a helpless look on his face as he carried a bunch of things in his arms. Ningchen felt very good in his heart. Seeing others in pain was really a pleasurable thing. Uncle Rome, thank you for your hard work. Although he was gloating in his heart, Ningchen still revealed a bashful and grateful smile. It's fine. Just focus on recuperating, Uncle Rome replied with a bitter smile. Uncle Rome, what's the situation outside? Is it still so chaotic? Ningchen asked curiously. It's much better. The Marquis of Taiping and the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis dragged their injured bodies out to take charge. At least some of the restless people have some fear and temporarily restrain themselves, Uncle Rong replied. Ningchen nodded his head in understanding. In the Grand Xia, the power of a marquis was not something the other officials could compare to. With 2 marquises taking charge at the same time, there would not be much trouble in the imperial city. The biggest problem right now was who the throne belonged to. The Grand Xia could not be without a ruler for too long. The decisions of Zhang Sun and the 3 dukes were extremely important. However, this decision was not so easy to make. Every prince had their own officials supporting them. Even the 3 dukes were not united internally. Duke Taisher was the first prince's teacher, Duke Jingwu was the third prince's martial arts guide, and Duke Xiu admired the 10th prince. In short, the situation was a mess that could not be sorted out in a short period of time. Logically speaking, the first prince was the eldest son. Although he was not the son of Zhang Sun, he was still the son of the former imperial noble concubine and was raised under Zhang Sun's name. Thus, it was perfectly justifiable for him to inherit the throne. However, in the history of the Grand Xia, there were not many true elders. This seemingly justifiable reason was actually not very convincing. In addition, the other two princes were equally outstanding. The strength of their support was also not to be underestimated. It had to be said that with the death of Emperor Xia, the Grand Xia would indeed be in chaos for a while. Who knew what that woman, Fan Lingyue, would do that again? Women being too smart was indeed a scary thing. Ning Qin felt a headache coming on. He did not want to think about it anymore. With great difficulty, he sorted out his emotions. Just as he was about to reach out and snatch little Mingyu's snacks, a voice that he did not want to hear rang out. Announcing the Empress's imperial decree, Marquis Zhongsun is to enter the palace. A young eunuch walked into the prince's residence and directly read out Zhongsun's decree. Ning Chun was immediately displeased. As expected, he did not escape. However, what made him even more displeased was that he did not dare to resist. Mingyu, are you going? Ning Chun turned his head and glanced at the little girl beside him who was eating a table full of snacks. I'm going. Mingyu threw down the snacks in her hand and replied. Let's go. Ning Chen took little Mingyu's hand and bade farewell to Uncle Rong. Then, he followed the young eunuch to the palace. The palace was now heavily guarded. The figures of the imperial guards could be seen everywhere. Every one of them had a faint murderous aura. They must have dealt with many people these days. Zhang Sun was waiting for him in the heavenly mandate palace. Now that he was no longer a eunuch, he definitely could not enter Weiyang Palace. It was very troublesome to meet Zhang Sun. According to the rules of the Grand Xia, the imperial harem could not interfere in politics. Usually, even Zhang Sun could not privately summon foreign officials. However, special times called for special treatment. Now that the Grand Xia was on the brink of crisis, if Zhang Sun did not come out to help stabilize the situation, the imperial court would be in chaos. In the heavenly mandate palace, Zhang Sun sat there quietly. Qingning was not by his side. It seemed that she had something to do and left. Ning Chen held little Mingyu's hand and walked over. He respectfully knelt down and saluted, causing little Mingyu to be stunned. Would a bad person salute someone? This was the first time she had seen it. That's enough. I don't usually see you following the rules so well, Zhang Sun said irritably. Ning Chen got up. He felt a little uneasy. Zhang Sun seemed to be in a bad mood. This time, he was most likely going to be struck by lightning. I am very busy, so I'll make it short. The Northern Meng military advisor needs you to talk to him. How the discussion goes, you can consider it yourself. I can't be bothered to say threats like bringing your head to me. However, before I clean up this mess, I don't want to see the Northern Meng's army under my nose. There were no outsiders present. Zhang Xuan's tone was very impolite. She only made requests and did not care about the specifics. She did not have the energy to care. These matters in the palace were enough for her. Just me alone? Ning Chen asked, puzzled. Why are you going alone? Do you want to die? Zhang Sun was so angry that she wanted to kick him. Ning Chen's neck shrank after being scolded and he immediately lowered his head. Zhang Sun suppressed the irritation in her heart and said in an unfriendly tone, the Marquis of Blood-Clothed will go with you. In addition, I will send you 5,000 imperial guards to accompany you. In addition to the 70,000 soldiers in Beichui City, no matter what you do, you have to delay until Great Xia recovers. Ning Chen nodded fiercely and did not dare to say anything more. Go back and prepare today. We will set off early tomorrow morning. All right, you can go. After saying this, Zhang Sun waved her hand and directly drove him away. Hearing this, Ning Chen did not say anything. After saluting, he quickly turned and left. Little Mingyu was also shocked by Zhang Xuan's aura and looked a little silly. After leaving the heavenly mandate palace, the two of them let out a sigh of relief at the same time. She's so fierce, little Mingyu said with lingering fear. I'm used to it. Ningchen was covered in cold sweat. Do you think Sister Lingyue will withdraw the army? Mingyu looked up and asked. Ever since she saw so many soldiers who died in Beijing Plain, she felt more and more that war was wrong. Ningchen did not answer directly but asked, if you were still in Beimeng Imperial Palace and ordered Fan Lingyue to withdraw the army, do you think she would? Mingyu thought for a while and finally shook her head in frustration.
No.
Although Sister Lingyue doted on her a lot, it was impossible for her to compromise on this kind of matter. She had not taken over the government, and her power was limited. As long as Sister Lingyue insisted on not withdrawing, she could not do anything. Does Fan Lingyue look like a bad queen? Ningchen did not want little Mingyu to be too depressed and joked. Just a little. Mingyu stretched out her little finger and secretly gestured. Ha, you've improved. Ningchen chuckled. At least he did not tell her the story in vain. Was this considered educating her from a young age? Fan Lingyue had already grown up bad. He had to quickly grow, a kind little flower. A day passed quickly. On the second day, the army set out. The 5,000 imperial guards headed north in a grandiose manner. Marquis blood-robed rode at the front of the army, wearing a dark red battle suit. He was the most hard-working martial Marquis in Wuxia. He had guarded the Western Territory for many years and fought against the entire Eternal Night cult. Marquis Bloodrobed was defeated in a battle with a martial monarch and was seriously injured. However, in this world, how many people could survive in the hands of a martial monarch? Marquis Bloodrobed was only a half-step Xiantian, but he was able to do something that even Xiantian could not do. This was the first time Ningchen and Marquis Bloodrobed met. After meeting, Ningchen respectfully bowed. This martial marquis, who did not hesitate to strike a stone with an egg in order to protect Wuxia's borders, was truly worthy of respect. Marquis Bloodrobed was not good with words and only nodded slightly. The mighty army rushed day and night and rarely rested. The Imperial Guards were all experts with a foundation in martial arts. This kind of intensity was still acceptable. However, little Mingyu was suffering. The little girl could not stand the bumpy ride on the horse. Ningchen's heart ached when he saw this, so he got off the horse and carried little Mingyu on his back and followed the army on foot. A strange look flashed through Marquis Bloodrobe's eyes, but he did not say anything. 7 days later, the army that had rushed day and night finally arrived at Beitsue City. On the opposite side, Northern Meng's main camp had already been stationed for half a month. The soldiers and horses were orderly and could attack at any time. On this night, Ningchen wrote a letter and sent it to Northern Meng's main camp, which was 15 kilometers away. The content was very simple. There were only 11 words. Mingyu is in my hands. Come out and talk. Chapter 107. In the commander's tent of the Northern Meng camp, Fan Lingyue sat quietly in front of the table, reading the letter sent by the great Xia envoy. A strange look flashed across her beautiful face. In the end, they still officially met. Since the first time Ning Chen's name appeared in front of her, she wanted to kill him. She hated unexpected things the most in her life, and Ning Chen's appearance was very likely to become an unpredictable variable in her plans. Facts proved that her worries back then had become reality. In the short few months that followed, Ning Chen had ruined too many of her plans, causing the world's war against the great Xia to change. She wanted to get rid of him, but unfortunately, she had not succeeded. Now that things had come to this, she could only accept it. Thinking of this, Fan Lingyue looked at the envoy in front of her and said calmly, "Go back and tell Ning Chen that I will wait for him before the Ming army arrives." The envoy of the great Xia dynasty bowed and left. After the envoy left, Fan Lingyue looked at the letter on the table and slowly closed her eyes. Her mind was heavy as she weighed the pros and cons. Behind her, Qing Huio looked a little worried, but did not dare to disturb her. The atmosphere in the tent was quiet and somewhat oppressive. After a long time, Fan Lingyue opened her eyes and made up her mind. She could not ignore Mingyu's safety, and Ning Chen very likely already knew that Mingyu was a girl. Once exposed, it would be a heavy blow to the Northern Meng royal court. The Empress could not be accepted by the world, and Northern Meng was no exception. She had to save Mingyu, but it was impossible to retreat. Fortunately, Ning Chen also had his own weaknesses, and she was not completely helpless. Men, Fan Lingyue said. Present, a general walked in and bowed respectfully. Send this letter to Sword City. Fan Lingyue took out a letter that she had prepared long ago and instructed. Yes, the general took the letter and left quickly. How is the southwest? That little bald donkey has been in Northern Meng for some time. Has the old monk still not made up his mind? Fan Lingyue asked calmly. According to the report of the spies, the abbot of Du Yi Temple has already begun to recall the monks of the Buddhist kingdom. It should be soon, Qing Huio replied seriously. Buddhists who preach justice can't resist temptation in the end. In this world, there is no such thing as absolute justice, Fan Lingyue sneered softly, her tone slightly mocking. You can leave now. After asking all the questions, Fan Lingyue asked. Military advisor, His Majesty is here. Qing Huio opened his mouth, and there was a trace of uneasiness in his eyes. He didn't know what the military counselor was planning, but there was no doubt that Great Xia would make an issue out of the safety of the emperor. He was worried that the military counselor would compromise, but he was even more worried that the military counselor would remain indifferent. Now, the safety of His Majesty and the advance and retreat of the Northern Meng army were all in the hands of the military advisor. No matter what he chose, there was no solution. I know what I'm doing. You may leave, Fan Lingyue said indifferently.
Yes.
Qing Huio sighed softly and turned to leave. Now, he could only hope that the military advisor would be able to lead the Northern Meng army out of this dilemma. Northwest City. Ning Chen stood in front of the window in his room, similarly thinking of a countermeasure. The person he had to face was Fan Lingyue, the smartest woman in the world. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause him to pay an unbearable price. He had never underestimated this woman, yet he had still suffered in the hands of Fan Lingyue time and time again, almost dying a few times. If it wasn't for his luck, he would already be drinking tea with the king of hell right now. Transmigration wasn't omnipotent, but Fan Lingyue was omnipotent. He had suffered enough losses. Now, his only advantage was that he had little Mingyu in his hands. Fan Lingyue would more, or less, have some misgivings. In addition, Mingyu was a girl's secret, so he could use it to exchange for something. He promised little Mingyu that he wouldn't tell anyone because he was afraid that the little girl would be hurt and Fan Lingyue would know. With such a good advantage, it would be a waste not to use it. Fan Lingyue would definitely not agree to retreat. How to make the best use of the trump card in his hands was the most important thing for him to consider. There weren't many soldiers in Northwest City, only 70,000. In addition to the 5,000 Imperial Guards that he and the Marquis brought, it wasn't even a third of the Northern Meng army. 75,000 against 250,000, including 100,000 iron cavalry and 10,000 heavy cavalry. No matter how he thought about it, it was an extremely nonsensical matter. Northern Meng's iron cavalry weren't idiots who didn't know how to fight after getting off their horses. Moreover, the truly terrifying thing was the 10,000 invulnerable heavy cavalry. On the battlefield, they were killing machines that couldn't be stopped. There were no more than 10,000 heavy cavalry. If there were more than 10,000 heavy cavalry, they couldn't be stopped. In the east, the Eternal Night cult relied on 30,000 heavy cavalry to beat Great Xia. If it wasn't for Marquis Kaixuan and the 100,000 Blackwater army, the east side of Great Xia would have been destroyed long ago. Northern Meng didn't have as many heavy cavalry as the Eternal Night cult, but there were still 10,000 of them. On the battlefield, they were still invincible and unstoppable. Great Xia only had Marquis Kaixuan and the 100,000 Blackwater army. It wasn't easy to deal with the martial lords and the heavy cavalry of the Eternal Night cult, so it was impossible for them to have extra energy to care about this side. The matter of reinforcements couldn't be hoped for in the short term. Zhang Sun was already having a hard time holding on in the imperial city. The sudden death of Emperor Xia had an even more obvious impact. Great Xia had to be on guard against internal strife. The military forces around the imperial city couldn't be easily mobilized. Otherwise, once a mutiny occurred, it would be too late for regrets. The greed of humans was incomparably terrifying. They wouldn't give up on the throne just because there was a great enemy outside. This was also the reason why Zhang Sun and the three dukes didn't dare to rashly appoint a new emperor. The eldest prince wasn't too bad. He didn't show much desire for the throne and had always had an indifferent attitude. However, the other two princes were different. After the disappearance of Emperor Xia, they tried their best to rope in a large number of influential officials. In addition, after the death of Emperor Xia, the officials immediately took sides. The wings of the two princes were already full, and it was impossible to cut them off so easily. In any dynasty, the matter of the princes fighting for the throne was full of bloodshed. The Great Xia dynasty had been established for 1,000 years, and there were many talents among the princes. If it weren't for the control of each generation of Emperor Xia, this kind of battle would be even more bloody. Xia Rui had brought great trouble to the Great Xia when he was alive. After his death, he also left a huge hidden danger for the Great Xia. The three princes were all favored by God. One was lucky. Any more would be a disaster. He knew that Zhang Sun was having a hard time holding on, which was why he agreed to come so quickly. Now that the Great Xia was facing internal and external troubles, there weren't many people that Zhang Sun could rely on. Since Zhang Sun asked him to come, he had to come. This was the most difficult period for the Great Xia. If they could pull through, they might still have a chance of winning. If they couldn't, the 1,000 years of the Great Xia would really come to an end. The headmaster said that the Great Xia would be destroyed. He didn't know if it would be in this war, but he had to give it a try. Although he didn't like to talk nonsense like man can conquer nature, he would definitely use all that he had learned in his previous and current lives to fight against this bullshit God's will. Bad guy, I can't sleep. At this moment, Mingyu sat up from the bed. She couldn't hide the worry on her face. She was a little scared. Tomorrow, the bad guy and Sister Lingyue would officially start the negotiations. She was struggling in her heart, not knowing who to hope for. She knew that Sister Lingyue wouldn't withdraw the troops. The war between the two dynasties would continue. She was the emperor of the Northern Meng. Of course, she didn't want the soldiers of the Northern Meng to be buried in a foreign land. If the bad guy had the upper hand, it would undoubtedly be a disaster for the Northern Meng army. However, if Sister Lingyue had the upper hand and continued to go south, there wouldn't be many of the 300,000 soldiers who could return alive. Ningchen walked to the front of the bed and gently rubbed the little girl's hair. He sighed in his heart. From the beginning, this war of life and death was destined to be a road of no return. Fan Lingyue wanted to build a prosperous and huge empire for Mingyu. However, this road was paved with the corpses of the soldiers and people of the Great Xia. Even the 300,000 soldiers of the Northern Meng army would become the sacrifice of the former's ideals. He couldn't say that Fan Lingyue's actions were definitely wrong. War itself was a sin, and there had never been a side that was absolutely righteous. Moreover, no one knew if this ideal century of prosperity would come. Even Fan Lingyue himself couldn't be sure. Just like how he couldn't convince Fan Lingyue couldn't convince him either. He couldn't accept Fan Lingyue's actions of sacrificing millions of lives for an ideal that he didn't know if it could be realized. It had nothing to do with right or wrong. It was just that their ideals were different. In the history of Wuxia, even the most powerful dynasty couldn't unify the world. 100 generations of prosperity was merely an unattainable goal for the emperors of each dynasty. No one had truly achieved it. While thinking, the long night gradually passed. At dawn, Ning Qin walked out of the room. The Marquis was already waiting in front of the battle array. Today would be the most critical moment in the war between the two dynasties. The future of the Great Xia and the Northern Meng would depend on the confrontation between the two people today. The Marquis didn't know if the young man in front of him could shoulder this burden, but he believed in the Empress' decision. Neither of them spoke. Accompanied by the clattering footsteps of the 5,000 imperial soldiers, they walked toward the north step by step. The two armies were only 30 miles apart. After 2 hours, the Northern Meng camp was already in front of them. Qing Wuyo's heavy cavalry was also in formation. The black heavy armor emitted a deep chill under the sunlight, causing people to feel cold all over. In between the two armies, there was a pavilion that stood alone. In the past, it sheltered people from the wind and rain. Today, it would become the place where the two dynasties clashed. Fan Lingyue sat quietly in the pavilion. She was dressed in a light blue robe. Her long hair was casually tied behind her back. Her beautiful face was calm, without the slightest ripple. The three generals stood outside the pavilion, respectfully guarding the belief of the Northern Meng imperial court. The Marquis accompanied Ning Chen to the pavilion, but he stopped in his tracks. The main character today wasn't him, but the woman in the pavilion and the Marquis Jiming beside him. Ning Chen walked into the pavilion and looked at the woman who was quietly brewing tea in front of the stone table. He didn't disturb her. "Please." Fan Lingyue poured a cup of tea and pushed it in front of Ning Chen. "Many thanks." Ning Chen picked up the tea and tasted it. It was slightly bitter in the mouth, but it instantly left a fragrance. The tea was good, but the tea maker's skills were even better. It was a calm and peaceful scene, and no one could see any tension or conflict. Since the two of them had known each other, they had appreciated each other's talents and wanted to get rid of each other at all costs. Neither of them had shown any falsehood or hesitation. They had feelings, but they had never shown mercy. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.